ICQ Podcast, the 400th episode. Well, hello fellow Amateur Radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this our 400th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by ICQ Podcast 400 Club members Winston Lawrence, KD2 Whiskey Lima Lima, Neil Connor, Mike 6, Charlie Uniform Echo, and Malcolm Heath, Kilo Sierra Zero Tango. We're also supported this episode by one-off donors Koos van der Hout, Papa Echo 4, Kilo Hotel, Daryl McCaffrey, Victor Kilo 6, Delta Mike Charlie, and of course our monthly subscription donors. In this episode we join Martin M1MRB, Chris, Mike 0 TCH, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOA, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is our recollections of 400 shows. Well, as mentioned, our wonderful donors this episode have stepped up to help keep our show advert free and keep us, as I say, doing what we do. First off, we'd like to thank the forever known ICQ Podcast 400 Club members, Winston Lawrence, KD2 Whiskey Lima Lima, who's been a member of that club now for a couple of weeks. And new members, Malcolm Heath, Kilo Sierra Zero Tango, and Neil Connor, Mike 6, Charlie Uniform Echo. And Neil says, wishing you and the team there at the ICQ all the best for the future and keep up the good work. So we'll certainly do our best to look after that there for you. We also would like to thank Daryl McCaffrey, VK6 Delta Mike Charlie, who sends his good wishes to us, and also Koos, Papa Echo 2 Kilo Hotel. He says thanks for making the ICQ podcast. He's realised he's been listening for years and just wanting to support what we do. So say many thanks for thinking of us there. Now, of course, you can do what the guys have done and our monthly subscription donors, and as they support and show the value for what you receive in your ICQ podcast. And you can do that by visiting icqpodcast.com/donate, where, as I say, you turn the value you receive from the show into a monetary figure and send it our way, and everything goes towards the running costs of the show. Right, well, now we're going to proceed on here with episode 400. We join Martin, Chris, Martin, Frank, Bill, and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including Australian licence delays and International Space Station time travelling. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys. Welcome to this episode's News Roundtable for episode 400. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
So, did you say episode 400? Wow. 400 episodes, and we're still going. Unbelievable. Good evening, Martin. Good evening, guys. And a very special episode for us tonight.
Certainly is. Also, my partner in crime, my other partner in crime, that is, Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL. Good afternoon.
I have concerns because my license says that I am licensed to 400 watts. And every time we release an episode, people look at their iPod or their MP3 player and say, what? Another one? What? So that's 400 watts. What now? Now, America, fine. They've got 1,500 watts. So Bill and Frank, they're going to be absolutely fine. But what about the rest of it?
Set for life.
Yeah.
This is where we're going to announce we're all backing out, and it's now Bill and Frank.
Oh, don't stitch him up.
Excellent adventure. Yes, there you go.
Yeah. As you might have guessed, Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH, is on with us. Hi, Frank.
Hello, Martin and everyone. And I'm reminded of a one-hit wonder group that was What Not in the Seven Whatnots, or some version of that. So somehow I'm going to dig that up and send it to you, Martin.
Right. Oh, dear, I'm going to fail miserably, aren't I? We've also got Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invite, and happy 400.
Yeah, I don't feel 400. Well, sometimes I do, Bill. But yeah. And last but not least, and you guys haven't given him grief tonight over it, we have Mr. Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Oh, good evening, all. Sorry I'm sounding a bit croaky tonight, but I've been coughing and spluttering. But I've got some WD-40, and hopefully I'll get through tonight. But thanks for the invite, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. And you realise that there are people out there that might even try WD-40 now you've said it.
Other oil brands are available.
Yeah. Leslie's joking. Leslie's joking. Please, I don't
Made
want
in
any
Ireland, it's black.
Yeah, I don't want any medical bills. Yeah. I don't want to be like McDonald's where they have to put hot on the coffee cups because some woman burnt herself. But there you go. There you go. So, right, let's carry on with the news stories. Well, hi, guys, and welcome to the News Roundtable for episode 400. Tonight, we've limited it to four news stories because we're pretty sure that the feature, which is our celebration of 400 episodes, will go a little bit long. So hopefully you'll enjoy. Our first news story is that over there in Australia, the new Australian ham licenses have been delayed. They were expecting it to all be sorted out by the 1st of July. Now, they're saying it might take a little bit longer. I'm going to go to Frank first. Frank, I think this is something that if you promise somebody something, it should happen.
Well, I agree with you, Martin. And that is one of the problems that many bureaucracies, such as the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, is facing. I have no empirical evidence to this, but here's my hunch. After working with many, many federal state agencies, many of whom are still in a mainframe legacy environment. I don't know anything about ACMA. I could be just dead wrong on this. My guess is that it's not anything directly to do with amateur radio, that there are probably other services that they are also managing, and they are simply delaying this so that some other things that we don't really see fit together well. But I could be dead wrong, Martin. But I agree with you. If you promise somebody something, in general, you should make that promise or, have a really good reason why not.
Yeah, well, I suppose I'm being a bit stroppy, but I expect things to happen. Yeah, I not always get it right myself, but anyway, on that one. But there are some new changes happening. Martin, what's your thoughts?
Thing is, the problem is all the different licenses, wherever you go in the world, they're all different. Everybody allows different things. Our foundation license here allows us 10 watts, the equivalent in America, I believe, allows you 1,500 watts, but different bands, different privileges and stuff. So I don't know enough about the Australian system as to how it works. They talk about adding 6 meters to the standard level license. Do they have 3 levels of license? I'm surprised you don't have 6, although we do know that 6 can be potentially more of an issue health-wise. So maybe there's something behind that. I often think like the whole world should probably, we have the people that like the international frequency agreements and things like that. Is it the ITU? Or did I make that up? Wouldn't it be better for sort of a licensing sort of just come into a line around the world with, the caveats of, you can run more power if you're further away from a city sort of thing. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know enough about the existing system, and unfortunately I can't immediately find anything online to comment much further.
So just to clarify that, so the ITU essentially represents the regulators, so they're the people that make the decisions ultimately, and they have conferences every so many years. And the IARU, the International Amateur Radio Union,
that's what I was thinking of.
They're the ones that try to influence the allocations that we have, and that's based on the national societies.
Probably the people that should be, maybe they should be having conversations, but let's try and bring everybody into sort of more or less alignment.
Well, I think that's kind of what they do, to be fair, but not always possible, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame you can't. But yeah, any more on this one, Chris?
Well, I'm not sure I understand. It's not in a lot of detail as to why it's been delayed. It just says that they were planning to introduce something on the 1st of July and then get a bit longer, which, I mean, the 1st of July sounds like we're in we just started April now. So what's that, 4 months away? No, 3 months away. Which sounds like a reasonable amount of time to get something done. But almost they're realising that they haven't got enough time to do whatever they've got to do. So they're going to push it back. I don't see on here it says when it's going to happen now, which must be the worst part. The fact is they said we can't, 1st of July, I'm afraid it's not going to be then. but we can't say when it's going to be, which must be frustrating. It does say they're going to provide an update in the second quarter of the year, so hopefully fairly soon they'll get to know the new date when things are going to be introduced.
I think someone's been sitting on their hands for a little while. Like, oh, whoops! Yeah, we announced that, but
I'm sure there's a good reason, but yeah, that's all we're going to say.
Yeah, we don't really know. Leslie, any thoughts on this one?
Well, I don't know, but I would say these things always take a lot longer than you expect. There's always the unexpected crops up. And I don't know for a fact, but that seems to be the case in this one. It does talk about make certain determinations concerning license operational policy arrangements and to further clarify the implementation of higher power authorization. So there's a couple of bits they need to look at. And I think, yeah, it's just unfortunate. And I'm sure they're sorted out given time.
Yeah, I seem to remember going back a while when we were talking to Ed. At one point in time, Australia had a kilowatt. Top licenses could run a kilowatt, and there was some 6 meter stuff. And Martin, you're dead right. 6 meter band can be a little bit dangerous to the body because large parts of your body are resonant around about 6 meters. So they're around 50 megahertz. So yeah, that's another one. Bill, obviously, though, if you get more people on 6 meters and they get more power, there's more people for you to work in the contests.
Exactly. And the geography and where the bands of population are in Australia, 6 meter band would probably be a lot of fun. But yeah, the one thing about the announcement is there's not any indication of what's going on. And why? Is it an internal factor? Is it an external factor? Is it a contract problem? Usually these kind of releases have at least some hint as to what's going on.
Yeah, but as I say, there's some releases that we can talk about. And yeah, it's just a shame that it's not happening when they said. But let's hope they get it sorted fairly quickly and the amateurs down there gain access to the extra bits and pieces. So, right, let's carry on with the news stories. This news story came up early this morning. Leslie and I have looked at it, and it talks about Ofcom changes to amateur radio licenses, or changes in the amateur radio licenses. Now, I looked at the document. I can't see what they're going to do. It's very woolly. But Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
Yes, I got this story last night thanks to Essex Ham and Ofcom. And I'm going to read straight off the screen. It says that with Ofcom, the two notable paragraphs, the Wireless Telegraphy Act license simplification, along with our move to a new licensing platform, and that they're going to renew licensing processes and documentation to ensure that we have an efficient approach, reducing the burden on our licenses as far as possible and simplifying the engagement with us. A key part of the program will be our review on amateur licensing, and then goes on to say about amateur radio licensing review. They will consult on proposals to simplify the licensing framework for amateur radio licenses and incorporate new amateur radio activity, and their aim is to provide clear, updated rules which afford radio amateurs greater freedom to operate, drawing on feedback provided by the sector. Now that's as I've read off the screen. And I've been looking through the comments, and well done Essex Ham and their members for putting comments on. And I must admit that the proposals are very, very woolly indeed. And there's lots of discussion about actually what they mean. And I think it's a case of, let's see what the proposals say. What do they actually mean by this? Then for radio amateurs to look at it. I know there's going to be a consultation process, and regardless of people's own views, I would urge people to take part in the consultation. Otherwise, things will just go through ad hoc. You know, it's you don't want that. You want the input of radio amateurs, and it's very, very important. Whether I agree with your views or not, that's irrelevant. But do put your tuppence in. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from. And the other thing is, it as you say, it's very woolly, it's very vague. We're going to make your life easier. How?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah. Chris, you seem to think you can't make it much easier.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's online nowadays. I mean, it is pretty straightforward. Reading between the lines, it does talk about a new change to the platform. Now, I believe the existing online portal from Ofcom is based on technology from Salesforce, because the URL is ofcom.force.com and force.com is Salesforce. I'm assuming that using the Salesforce platform. So maybe they got plans to move to a different technology for their online platform, perhaps as part of that, looking to change or review how it works, maybe. I don't know. So maybe that's what it's based on. Not really sure. Perhaps, and as Leslie was saying, there'll be a consultation. So it's important that we, if we got some feedback and we got some views on this, that we should help Ofcom to, come to a decision based on what we think.
Yeah, well, as I say, they did away with Morse, nearly 20 years ago. It could be they're going to do away with some other requirement. Maybe we get more frequencies. I would suggest unlikely, but hey, we'll give it a see. Martin, what's your thoughts?
What frequencies would you give us? I don't know. I saw this announced earlier, and in fact, I saw it appeared on a Facebook group. I forget which one, but I'd saved it on my phone. Like, if we don't talk about this, we at least need to tweet it out. Yeah, the Ofcom stuff, it's really vague, and it's one of these people. Come on, if you're going to announce something, give it context. Give us the opportunity to comment on this. Leslie mentioned he read it out based on feedback provided by the sector. What feedback? Who is the sector? I would love to provide feedback before they go ahead and do things. Some things that Ofcom do, yeah, absolutely great. Completely support that. Other things, and I'm looking at the broadcast radio section, really should not have been authorised. And the people at Ofcom know who is responsible for this. They know exactly what they've done. And, I do wonder, what is going on behind the scenes at Ofcom? What are they up to? They're going to make it easier for us. What are they going to do? It is. I can't see any benefit to changing. Okay, you're going to change. Maybe they're going to change the platform. Maybe they're going to bring it into a new platform. Okay, but the existing platform, I didn't think it was particularly difficult to use. Now, maybe they're going to say, some people struggle to access it. Well, perhaps there's a generation of people that are perhaps not as good with IT. Well, you're going to bring it into a different platform. Well, maybe they're still not good with IT. So how's that going to help them? I don't know. I guess the only thing you can really do is just watch this space and hope that the broadcast team don't get involved with it.
So, Martin.
Hello.
So this Galileo satellite, they said they're going to make it a lot easier. Do you think they could shut the Galileo satellite down so we can continue on 23 SEMS? Or am I being naughty?
Just put a kilowatt on. It's fine. Get my big burner out.
Oh, I'm being naughty.
It's the Galileo satellite that's crippling 23 SEMS, is it? Because
it's a case of wait and see.
Yeah, but 23 SEMS is, like the what's the thing that spins around at Heathrow? The high power short range radar. That every time that goes around, you can see it interferes with like the BATC feed on a couple of the 23 SEMS TV repeats. So, 23 SEMS is already got interference on it. That's another story.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one? I know it's a UK thing.
Yeah, I was reading it, and the same deal is they're basically pre-announcing that they're going to do a public consultation, and then I guess at the end of the year give us some results. It's very vague. I would assume that most regulators that are working through what they have to regulate probably has some areas that they want to improve. And there's no even hint at that. Like, we want to make it easier, that kind of stuff. My negative self when I first read this story earlier today was, oh, the states are charging. We're going to make you guys charge too. But I don't know. So, and there is some pretty good theories out there, because I did see that in the article that the Essex Hams folks put out some, possibilities that they could be, going on. I'm not exactly sure. So it is definitely a wait and see kind of activity. And as soon as they announce their public consultation, I think that will give us a little bit more clues as to what's going on.
Yeah, I did wonder whether this was another Me Too based on the Australian story. But there you go. Frank, have we left you anything to say on this one? I know it's a UK story.
Well, it is, but it's an issue or a problem that faces us all. We may have a different regulator here in the States, but we still have similar kinds of things. I've always respected Essex Hams in terms of what they do, because they do a thorough job, and this one is no different in their story. Bill mentioned, I think, some of the things they speculated on, like what are they going to do? They're going to simplify the framework. They're going to reduce the burden on the licensing platform. They're going to talk about or make changes for new areas of activity, such as rules regarding digital voice, hotspots, gateways, and remote operation. Now, that, if they don't muck it up, that could be very progressive change. Over here in the States, and Bill's got more experience on this than I do, but we don't really have our Part 97 adapted to kind of new ways of operating, particularly with remote operation, to some degree hotspots and things like that. So that could be some very practical change that, if they don't get it goofed up, could be very good. Somehow clarifying rules. I agree with Martin Rothwell. Having been a GS-15 for the federal government, I can speak as someone sitting at the table on grant rules and regs. To ask government employees to clarify rules is generally a recipe to make them worse, but that may not be fair there. The thing that they talk about on this Essex Hams story, and they provide a little bit of data for, is what they claim is the disconnect between the license rules from Ofcom and the syllabus put out by RSGB. And they have a graph that shows the decline in upgrade. And they sort of articulate the intermediate license having a significant amount of full theory. So there's a decline from 2019 forward in making that change. That could be something that parallels the U.S. license picture of technicians as the entry-level license, moving up to get more HF privileges with the general or extra. So I think Essex Hams does a great job with articulating as best we can what might happen. Food for thought. I agree with Leslie. It's a wait-and-see situation.
Yeah, it is a wait and see, and we'll see how it goes. But I got a bit facetious earlier on about what may or may not happen. But as you rightly say, guys, we have to wait and see. Right, the next news story, on the face of it, it doesn't look amateur radio. The ISS Time Traveller, and they're talking about last week, in a couple of weeks, they're going to move the International Space Station up into a slightly higher orbit, because it's obviously coming down. And, you don't want it burning up in the upper atmosphere. So how does that affect amateur radio? Well, if you're somebody who tracks it via APRS or you use the repeater, then I think it probably does. What's your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, definitely. You'll need to update your Clarion elements to track the thing to begin with, and depending on how high they're going to move it, it may actually change the footprint of the repeater off of the ISS. The other thing that I was wondering about is it says that the article they're going to change the station velocity by 0.7 meters per second. Is that faster? Well, I guess it would be faster because it does say the orbit takes a bit longer, so that'd be slower. So that's the other thing too, is that would make an overhead pass be a little bit longer if the station is orbiting slower. So there's a lot of neat stuff in here to pull apart. Actually, if you try to work this thing to figure out, what the net effect is. It could be that they move the station so little we don't even notice it on the ground. But pretty much anytime you have to update your Keplerian elements for tracking, that's usually not more than a couple feet move. That's a pretty big move. So we'll see what happens in the next couple passes after I know that this happens. Because actually, I haven't been listening to ISS like I usually do. So we'll see here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, as you say, there's some interesting things may or may not happen on this one, but there you go. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, just been looking at the story. So the reason they're changing the orbit isn't because it's getting lower. It's because there's an Argentinian satellite that's going to be coming close by and they want to avoid it. So that's the reason why they changed the orbit, or they're going to change the orbit. And apparently the way it was done was the Progress MS-22 spacecraft was docked to it. So they kind of borrowed its thrusters for 6 minutes to move it, like I said, probably further out. So it's that has changed its velocity, it's changed its orbit slightly. It does travel. I was just actually looking on the internet. It travels at 28,000 kilometers an hour. So moving that by changing its speed by 0.7 meters a second, is not going to make a massive difference, but enough for it to be over time, I suppose, for its path to be altered. So yeah, it is important that people update their tracking software. Otherwise, they may be out of step and may miss it, etc. So it's very interesting, and yeah, hopefully people will update them to their tracking software, and it will all be just fine. And obviously, hopefully, it will miss this satellite as well, which I'm sure it will, because it's amazing how they can. I mean, to me, it's just amazing how they can actually calculate that at some point in a few weeks' time, there's a satellite going this direction and ISIS in this direction. How they actually know they're going to potentially collide and they know what to do. That to me involves some tremendous math. It's like they know that a comet's going to appear. The comet that's somewhere the other side of Pluto right now will appear for this time in 2 years' time, or how they calculate that there's going to be a solar eclipse at a certain time. There's some pretty clever maths involved in some of those things. So that's a bit beyond me, really. But yes, like I say, it's important that people do update their software so they don't miss it in the future.
Yeah. Well, as I say, the maths is probably above my head as well, Chris, so don't feel bad about it. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm not a satellite person, to be honest, but I did find the story interesting, and like was said, it's there to avoid a close approach by an Argentine imaging satellite. And what else was there? And we've also, at this location, we listened to it when it went over Gilwell Park. They had a station and they were listening to the ISS. And all I had was a little handheld setup with the dial slung out the window. And it was so easy to receive. And I believe that was on 2 meters FM. And it was great to listen to it. Anyway, that's all I've got to add on this one, Martin. Over to you.
Yeah, no problems. Well, there is amateur radio stuff, as you say, on the satellite, and that was when there was a big event up at Gilwell Park.
Sorry, the Gilwell Park one, I remember actually that pretty well. I think it was part of the YOTA event when it was over here in the UK, and they made contact. I seem to recall there was some sort of issue when they first tried to make contact, and they actually managed to schedule it for the next orbit. So they waited 45 minutes, and thankfully NASA and whoever else will get involved in ARIS were able to get the astronaut on the second time round. So that was quite interesting. I was also able to pick it up from my location. I don't think I could hear the ground. Actually, maybe I could hear the ground station, but certainly the ISS is generally pretty, like you say, it's just straight up in the air, so there's nothing in the way. So picking it up on on a radio is pretty straightforward. But I actually use my SDR to record the not the audio but the actual RF, and you can actually see the frequency change as the satellite ISS came over. So the Doppler shift, you can actually physically see it, it visually, which is quite interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, that was interesting. I remember that one. Frank, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'll repeat something I've said a few episodes ago. I think the first time I actually physically saw the ISS, I was living in Starkville, and a neighbor mentioned that it was going to be coming over. He was walking by, and I was out in the yard doing some things. And this was late in the evening on a warm day. And I just sort of propped up on my rake and waited. And I was just struck. I knew all of that intellectually. I knew about this ISS and all those things. But to just see it and to see how big it was there from the ground is really was one of those moments. It ranked up there probably second to walking on the moon. There are a couple of things embedded in this story that I think are important. I'll bring it up very, very briefly. I worked with the U.S. Department of Transportation some years ago on some of their roadway data for some GIS work, and I happened to be in a meeting with someone who was charged to be a historian of the DOT. And over coffee, we had a brief conversation about the emergence of traffic rules and regulations and ultimately laws. So here you got the ISS. It's going to come in close proximity to an Argentinian imaging satellite. Who has the right of way? Well, I don't know that we have all those rules worked out. I think we just have agreements among those who have satellites up in the air. And it may have been that the Argentinian imaging satellite, that is one that takes pictures and sends it back to Earth, it may not have been able to move. So here on the Barnett Reservoir, boats, power boats have to move, whereas sailcraft get the right of way. So there may be some analogs to traffic patterns there. And so it was good that that this was able to be shifted. And we'll see if it takes longer. Really impacts amateur radio because we're using more and more satellite technology. And I dare say that, and Bill's comments in response to what I'm about to say will be of interest. I dare say I think POTA, the Parks on the Air, has taken U.S. amateur radio by storm. I think second is satellite work in terms of new and emerging interest. So this type of stuff will be increasingly important, and I guess the ISS is the sort of easiest to interact with. Bill, what do you think?
I definitely agree with the POTA thing. I am just blown away with how it's like Wednesday night on 40 meters CW. Every Wednesday night, the band is packed here in the States all night long from, dark till like midnight Eastern time. It's just CW stations from the whole band. Seems like it. Same thing with POTA is there seems to be a couple handfuls of what I call continuous activators. They just seem to be always on the air. And there's a couple hundred more that are casual activators, and they're continuously on the air. The satellites, I know the FM ones are, it's like field day weekend on a satellite almost every weekend here. It was more when we had more of the CubeSats up that were FM only. Using a linear is not that much harder, but it's just hard enough that I don't hear as many stations on the linears as I would hear on an FM bird. But I will say that, especially on a weekend, it's a challenge to work somebody through one of the satellites even today. So I tend to agree with Frank on that. This is one of those things I'm going to kick back to Frank, but I think if we actually figured out a good method for collection of data other than just the cattle call surveys, I think we would be surprised, at least in North America, how the trends have changed in the last, I'll even say 15 years. Contests are still big, but I don't think they're as big as they used to be. However, the casual, I always pick on Wednesday night, 40 meter CW. It's a lot of the training programs like the CW Ops or on Long Island. They encourage folks to get on the air to practice their Morse on Wednesday night, and it really has taken off. And that's why I'm curious if we somehow had a data collection tool. And I know Frank's always thinking about these, so that's why I want to kick it back to you quickly.
I totally agree with you, and that's not a shock, to you, saying that the real problem, just for our listeners, with the cattle call surveys, some are better than others, but there's nothing in principle that's wrong with them. They just don't have a definable sample selection mechanism. So you get percent using satellites. Okay, fine. There's no question there. Yeah, that's what this group of people say, but how does that compare to everybody? And we don't really know that. So I'm in total agreement with you. I think the ARL's having a member survey or something that they're going to run next month, according to the CEO. It'll just be another cattle call deal. So that's something we really don't have. And I've teased in previous episodes that I'm analyzing what appear to be the best data I've seen on these kind of behaviors. What do you do? When do you do it? How long do you do it? What frequency and mode is collected by Radio Amateurs of Canada. And I got slowed by doing some other work for them. And I haven't really gotten back on it, finished it. I'm about 3/4 of the way done. And even though that is a cattle call, Bill, they do have some other data to check, some parameters like age and some things that give me a little more confidence. So when I get that done, maybe I'll do a feature or something on it, and we'll have at least some information from Canada. But I will tell you, you'll be surprised at the results. So, Martin, that's really all I've got to say. I think this is an interesting story, and embedded in it are a number of things that will have long-term interest for amateur radio operators. It's who's got the right of way, and where do we put things like the ISS when there's a conflict in patterns of their orbit.
Yeah, all copied, guys, all copied. Well, Martin, I know you ecstatic the first time you did satellites because I was with you, and I don't know if you worked the ISS, but maybe having a bigger footprint might make it easier for you.
I'll be honest with you. I think the problem with the ISS is there's just too many people calling it. I've seen the videos that they have filmed on board where he's listening and you can hear what the guy at the other end is hearing. And I guess, it's like having an antenna that is so high up, you can hear so much and everybody's talking to you all on the same frequency. Trying to get into the ISS is difficult. Have I tried it? Yes. Did I succeed? No. I have heard people on the ISS. I've heard, I think there was some Italian language stuff coming down before. I didn't understand it, but I knew it was the ISS because it's on that frequency. And it was at the time that there was a pass, and then as soon as it was overhead, I couldn't hear it because obviously I was using a vertical antenna, and then as it went over, I could hear it again. So there's definitely stuff coming from it, but I've never tried to use it. The first time I used the amateur satellite, and ironically, we spoke to someone that we knew straight away. It was Peter, 2M0SQL from Camham. He was literally at the other end of the country. He was up in Scotland somewhere, the other end of the country, the other end of the island in Scotland. So I was quite excited to do that. For me, that was, with the satellites, it was different because I suppose everybody wanted to talk to me because I was a new call sign on the satellite that they hadn't heard before. And a lot of people, obviously, they regularly speak to each other, but this is someone new. So that was quite good. But yeah, we seem to have done like full circle on this story. But, my question was, who do you decide who made the decision to move the ISS over moving the satellite? They obviously don't want to collide in space. There's a lot of space junk up there. Not just old satellites, but everything else that's up there. Who makes the decision to move the ISS? I wondered if that was because the ISS is manned and they could just do it manually rather than someone on the ground that has to keep the bird in the box. I don't know, but we've mentioned that already. So the only thing I would ask is, how do we update our software? If we've got software that plots where the satellites and the ISS and stuff is, how do you update it? Is that just a case of file update, or is that somewhere else that we have to look to download a plugin or something to make it work?
It's normally file update, Martin. So the plans, the elements will come down for you. So it's normally an update. And I suppose, in fairness, because the ISS is manned, you obviously want to protect life, so you move the ISS rather than, say, another satellite, and possibly that other satellite doesn't have the ability to move, my guess. Right, so that's where I think we're on that one. Okay, moving to our last news story, and I did say it was only going to be forward to today. Broadcaster shuts down Longwave transmitter in Iceland. Well, that's another one off the air in another country. All right, this is on the Longwave, but no, it's quite a strange one. Martin, you work in broadcast. What do you think?
It was only a matter of time, wasn't it? I mean, they say here, the Longwave radio transmitter in Iceland has been shut down and demolished as Iceland faces out that form of broadcast. 218 metres, 207 kilohertz, it says. That can't. Oh, standing to the mast was 218 meters tall. It was operating on 207 kilohertz.
It's about 1.5 kilometers. Looking just on a quick Google on that. So it's a big wave.
Yeah. So, and hence we call it Longwave. So the mast has come down, giving priority to FM. It's always sad when things like this go off the air. You think, just another broadcaster gone off the air. RTE, the Irish broadcaster, have also announced that they are now turning off 252 Longwave. I think that goes off, I want to say April the 14th, imminently. It's been broadcasting RTE's Radio 1 since Team Talk 252, and before that, Atlantic 252 got shut down in 2001. I'll be honest, I can't hear anything on Longwave anymore. My car doesn't have Longwave in it. In my house, using my SDR Play, I just hear noise, PLT, switch mode supplies. It's an obvious saving to turn these things off, but it is obviously really sad. I honestly thought the DAB would be switched off. Well, it has in Ireland, but I honestly thought DAB would be switched off in the rest of the UK and places before Longwave and AM did, just because of the coverage and stuff that you can get from one over the other. Power-wise, remember Longwave 252 Atlantic was 500,000 watts. In the 90s, it was consuming £1,000 worth of electricity per day, and that was in the 90s. What's that worked out to today? Are they still running that same kind of power? So, it's a significant burden on like the equivalent of the national grid. It's a significant cost to the broadcaster. Of course they're going to turn it off, but it's sad. But if there's not many people listening to it because of the background noise, because of the fact that their cars and things just don't have the ability to receive it, why would you leave it on?
Well, that's a very good question, and it is. It's a shame to see another one gone. Bill, any thoughts on this one?
No, pretty much the same thoughts that Martin has. It's kind of a shame, but at the same time, the article talks about the build out of FM, and I'm not really sure the size of Iceland, but a couple FM stations. Maybe that'll work out. I'm not sure. So it's kind of, I mean, a lot of this stuff is based a lot on geography, and some places in the world, it's just, you just needed so many transmitters for FM to cover an area, especially if it's VHF. It just, I don't know. I just don't know. And then other areas of the world,
some of that bill depends on where their population is.
Yeah, and that's why I was just getting ready to say.
Their population is kind of packed in certain spots. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, if they have a concentration of population, they're going to have a better experience in general with FM. But I mean, you also have to think. I always worry about the power on this stuff, and it's like, yeah, you don't want to pay the electric bill, but the same way as if the listenership is way down, then it really doesn't make any investment sense to just use that kind of electricity.
Yeah, well, in fairness, I always thought in the UK we have Radio 4 on Longwave, and one of the main reasons I think Radio 4 is on Longwave is for the shipping forecast. And ships in British waters get the weather forecast a couple of times a day. And yeah, I never really understood it. When I was travelling to work at 5:30 in the morning and I was halfway to work, the British shipping forecast used to come on about 5:20 to 5:30. And I didn't understand most of it, but it was every morning, and I'm sure if you were in maritime, you'd be able to sort that one out. Frank, you live by the water, but obviously you wouldn't need that sort of information. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, the body of water I live on is, I think, about 33,000 acres or something like that. But Bill's comments kind of intrigued me, and I apologize for interrupting Bill, but I did look up a population density map in Iceland, and on the one hand, the densest populations near Reykjavik, southwest corner, but then there are areas that have a significant population in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, all over the country. So, in a sense, your fears are there, in terms of being able to get the FM routed there. So I guess it's a use case, and as Martin alluded to, what are they broadcasting on Longwave? And I don't know. It's just kind of sad. I think most of us who are in amateur radio know that, at least in the States, we got 200 meters and down thrown at us to get rid of us. And we sort of hate to see some long-standing transmitters go by the wayside. But when I read this, that not only had been shut down, but it was demolished, that's over. So sad, but just the way it is.
Yeah, it is a sad one. Well, I work with the guy next to me who's an amateur at work, and he operated from Iceland. Went over there and did some operating. And he said the noise floor is so quiet. He said, you can hear stations. You could, if they can hear you, it would be great. He said, you hear everything. And he said, the background noise there is just so brilliant. But he said, chances are the station the other end can't hear you because they're in a not such a good location. Anyway, Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yes, it's a shame. Interesting. I was looking up Radio 4, and it worked, as we know, that's BBC Radio 4 is on 198 kilohertz. And just looking into this on Wikipedia, it talks about the Droitwich transmitting station, which I think covers most of England and Wales. And I think there's another one in Scotland, possibly. That runs at 500 kilowatts. And there was an announcement in 2011, according to this, that says, and I've got to find the part of the page that says it now, that essentially it's relying on some very, very large valves or tubes, as our American cousins call them, and basically there aren't very many left, and it's likely that once those tubes become faulty, the station will shut down. In fact, it says it here, yeah. So there's only 10 left in the world. There are only 10 left of these valves, and this was back in 2011. This was announced, possibly even less now. So it looks like at some point that station will close down. Once those valves are no longer available, then I'm afraid to say just technology will have overtaken it, and it will no longer be on the air. So unfortunately, it looks like perhaps for technical reasons, these stations are gradually starting to disappear. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it'll be technical reasons, real estate cost, electric cost, all those things. It's a shame to see them go, though. But Leslie, last words on the subject?
I think everything's already been covered. I mean, there's obviously technical changes and costs are going through the roof on running things. So it's sad, very sad indeed, but I think inevitable, really.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But as I say, let's hope that we still keep a few around the world so we can use the radios that go down that low to be able to receive them, just so we can have a bit of fun as well. Great, well, that concludes the news stories. Let's see what the guys have been up to since the last time we spoke So, Bill, you're on a bit of a hard stop tonight, so I'm going to let you go first.
I do appreciate that. The DX record month of March just continued onward. New Caledonia, Sudan, UAE on 20-meter sideband. Fiji Islands, D4DX, Cape Verde, E6AF, I just E6CI. I've been having just an amazing month again here, just chasing DX. It's been great. Antenna's been going good. Flex has been down for a few days, but my replacement part just showed up. That's one thing that you don't want to have problems, but man, I put the issue in Monday and the part's here today on Wednesday. So they definitely took care of me on that. So that's all I have for this month. DX is on there. Get on the HF bands and call some CQ.
Yeah, well, you sound like you've been having a lot of fun, Bill. And I'll be honest with you, I ought to get on HF. I've just been busy. There's been a lot going on in my world recently. Hopefully it's going to start quietening down a bit soon. But yeah, I must get out and do some HF. So, yeah. Right. Frank, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
Well, I gave another talk on my transmit quality study on modern HF transceivers, this time to the Long Island CW Club. Good group of folks up there in attendance, and asked them some good questions. And as they do for all their speakers, they gave me a free year of membership in the club. So that was quite nice. My portable operations team participated in the Mississippi QSO party on April 1st. We have 5 operators on my team, including me, Mike, N5DU, Thomas, N5WDG, Clay, AC5Z, and Mike, K5XU. We had stations on sideband CW and FT8. Now, we're completing our final log for the submission, and as I always like to tease the contest operators, Mike, N5DU, is an attorney. I usually like to tell them, look, I'll just have my attorney send my log in to you, kind of as a joke. But I can say that we upped our contacts on sideband over last year. CW held its own and actually made a few more, but we doubled our contacts on FT8. And the reason for that, maybe better propagation this year, but strategy was another. We use one operator as a scout, and that person, when they're not working a station, they're monitoring Whisper, PSK Reporter, and a spotting website to give us some intel about what band's opening up, what mode, should we switch, should we move one thing here, one thing there, what's the operator's gut feel on other people out there, other contacts worth having. Now, we couldn't do self-spotting. That's against the rules, but others could spot us and report that, and that's okay. One thing, I decided to put our FT8 station on 15 meters by mid-morning. The contest kicks off at 9 a.m. local time. And we made a few contacts there, but moved up to 10 meters around noon, and we just feasted on 35 watts and a G5RV antenna on FT8 all the time until it got dark. Another strategy there is we moved to 80 meters when we were in full darkness here, and our CW and sideband operators felt like they had sort of run drive contacts, and 80 meters was constant from 7:30 p.m. till closing time. My last contact was at 8:57. It was an international station calling me. And in this contest, we get a grid square for an international contact. So we had 75 unique grid squares, which gave us a multiplier of about 18 and change. And last year, our multiplier was about 8. Had no luck on 6 meters using FT8 and the Moxon antenna, just the luck of the propagation gods. But we had a good time. This is a very good team. We get along with one another, and we enjoy our operations. I want to give thanks to the listeners who worked us, as a few mentioned that they do listen to the podcast on the sideband station. Another activity is working with a couple of other collaborators that made some progress in linking several fusion repeaters through a Wires X network. We should have about 6 of them linked in central Mississippi over the coming weeks, and it's something we're calling the Magnolia Intertie. I finally took receipt of a beam. I'd mentioned this project a couple of episodes ago. I'd ordered it 6 months ago, the high gain TH2 MK3. It's a tri-band 10, 15, and 20 meter 2-element beam. And that's no big deal, but it will be installed in my attic just under the main joist and below the Cushcraft D4 40 through 10 dipole that I've written about. The boom length on this antenna of 6 feet will allow for me to install it in my attic. Well, and it's an experiment, and we'll see if it works and if it works in a reasonable fashion. And I expect it to do so as the Cushcraft D4 does. But I'll report on how that installation tune-up and performance goes in a month or two. And Martin, as I said before, it's pointed directly at you in London, just the luck of the draw and the way my house is laid. Didn't do some other things because they've got the usual spring cleanup time, pressure washing, brickwork, cleaning windows, and all this kind of thing. It's limited some activities, but I was able to get these things done, Martin.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the boss has also kept you busy that side of the pond.
Yes, she has, my friend. Yes, she has.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're having some fun with radio, which is a good thing, Frank. It's a good thing. Leslie, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Pottering about with the Silverthorne Radio Club, as I usually do, Martin. Doing a bit of training, just showing the newbies how to use the kit, getting them to use the kit, which is even more important, and the perennial task of the shack, trying to sort out the shack, which never seems to end. But we will get there one day, I'm sure of it. That's pretty much it, Martin.
Yeah, well, it sounds good fun. At least you've been doing some things, and I find it, I suddenly realise why I don't always have as much as some of you guys do, because I'm on here once a fortnight, and you guys get 4 weeks to find things. I shot myself in the foot there, didn't I? Oh, dear. So anyway, Martin, what have you been up to?
Not as much as everybody else, that's for sure. I have been playing with D-Star. I have been playing on 55D, sending and receiving some pictures, just playing with that of an evening. That's a bit of fun because when my wife is putting my daughter to bed, that's the time when there's activity going on there. So I will switch that on sort of pretty much every other night because we take it in turns to put her to bed. So I play with D-Star pictures. I have been on our talk group a few times. Other than that, the only other thing that I did was I set up my SDR Play again. I've installed it with my hotspot and bits and pieces as a server running in there. So I'm running a piece of software. I think it's called USB here, and it basically means that I can run my SDR Play over my Wi-Fi network. Now I've got a pretty decent Wi-Fi network, and wherever I am with my laptop or my desktop computer, I can just say connect to this device, which it goes off and finds on the network, and I can use it. And I don't have to think about, I've got to go and now connect up an antenna, I've got to go and do this. No, I can just click on it, hit connect, and play with that. And I've been listening to lots of the shortwave stations, and it amazes me. I can't hear longwave, but I can hear shortwave, and the amount of stations you can hear on there, trying to work out and identify where they're coming from. I can, perhaps wrongly, but stereotypically, I can hear songs, music playing that sounds like an Oriental type of music, like the kind of music you hear if you go into, say, perhaps a Chinese restaurant, and I'm guessing that that's the part of the world that they're coming from. I might be wrong on that. Equally, there's other stations on there. There was literally there's a station on shortwave playing Pink and Get the Party Started, which was late 90s, early 2000s. That had some American voices on it, so I think that was an American station. Unfortunately, the signal faded before they said who they were. But it was quite interesting to do. That's pretty much it. I've not really done much else with radio recently.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're having fun.
Martin, was that called virtual here?
Virtual here, yes.
Virtual here as opposed
virtual here, yes.
Okay, great.
We're using the free version
sounds
of that.
marvelous. I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, you have to change something. So they do tell you how on the SDR Play website how to do it. You have to change the setting to, I think, USB bulk, otherwise it will blue screen your machine. But it is quite easy to do, and you need to have a rock solid network connection. So if you've got a really, really busy Wi-Fi, it's probably best to hardwire into your Ethernet. But if you've got decent Wi-Fi, then you'll be fine.
Right, so that sounds interesting. That one sounds interesting. Chris, apart from Globetrotting, which I know you was last weekend, what else have you been up to, or anything in radio?
A little bit. In fact, last weekend I was in Amsterdam with a couple of non-amateur friends, and we actually took with us some PMR 446 little tiny radios that I bought at a rally a while ago. I don't know exactly which one it was now, but little tiny little handhelds for the license-free PMR 446 service here in Europe. So yeah, it was in Amsterdam, and we used that just in the hotel. That's all, which is quite cool, just to organise things. But before that, 25th, 26th of March was the CQ Worldwide WPX contest. Now, I'm not a contester, but at the end of the contest, I like to, if it's a big contest like that, I like to sort of jump on and see if I can make some contacts, because typically that's when people want to work somebody. So they tend to be a little bit more, their ears tend to be a bit more open, shall we say, just trying to make as many contacts as they can. So I tend to, jump on then. So I made 21 contacts on the Sunday afternoon towards the end of the contest. And one was in China, actually, which is pretty good. So I think, Frank, the propagation, the sunspot cycles are as per the predictions, your predictions, rather than the official predictions, which is looking very promising, actually. So that's excellent. One interesting station of note was there was a, and I did put a recording of this actually on the ICQ podcast Facebook group. There was a station. Now, this guy was around about 2,000 points at the time. Well, 2,000, sorry, his serial was around about 2,000. So he'd always done an awful lot of contacts. But he was actually operating using a computer on SSB. So basically, it was a computerized voice that was saying your serial number and 7-3 and all that sort of thing. There was no person talking. It was just a guy at the other end typing in your number and call sign into his computer, and then it was almost spurting out the voice to do the sort of, he's even say thanks after the contact, that sort of thing, which is quite clever. Now, I originally thought, I wonder if this is someone that's perhaps disabled, isn't able to speak for themselves, but actually occasionally he would jump in and speak himself, sort of thing. So that wasn't the case. So that was quite interesting. The first time I've heard that, it's almost like FT8 for SSB sort of thing, as in you could just leave the computer to almost just to do it yourself. Other than that, I was there at Hamzilla. I've not been on the podcast since then, so I know that the last episode we had the features there from the Hamzilla event. Just looking on YouTube, the SDR Play interview about SDR Connect seems to be doing pretty well. We've got about 1,800 reviews on that in 10 days, so quite pleased about that. And that was very interesting to do that, along with talking to Mike from CCOM. So that's probably about me, Martin.
Yeah. Well, as I say, a lot doing, and interesting. You took license-free walkie-talkies to Amsterdam, and at least the non-amateur radio people that were with you got a flavour for using a walkie-talkie. So that's
exactly. Yeah,
bit of fun. And we often use handy talkies when we're away between hotel rooms, so that works for us too. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I think Frank might be wanting one of these, or he might already have one, but I bought myself a new signal generator it's a waveform generator, the Siglent one, and I bought the 60 megahertz one, so I can generate signals up to 60 megahertz in all the different modes and have it modulated. And I was doing some work with that over the weekend, and it's an arbitrary waveform generator. And I didn't buy it for the arbitrary bit, but it turns out that if I see a strange waveform on my scope, I can put a USB connector in, copy that waveform, stick it into the waveform generator, the arbitrary waveform generator, and ask the waveform generator to generate that signal. And technology's come on phenomenally. I mean, that literally blew my mind a little bit, but hey, that's what it's for. So, kind of, Frank, I bought the Siglent one, and I quite enjoyed that.
I went with the Regal. With the Regal, and the only reason is I had their 4-channel O-scope, and that was the only reason. But I really like the Siglent.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with the Siglent one. So, yeah. What else did... gentleman I work with at work, he's involved with the Scouts, and we were talking about the build project for Jota, and I found these little boards on the internet, audio boards, audio amplifier with an LM386 on, and they're silly money. The whole board costs, I think, about £1.50, which probably is about maximum of $2 in the States. And I had a play with mine. I found an old speaker I had kicking around in an old box, pulled the volume control off the board and put a proper volume control on the box with an audio input, just to check how well it was working. And we're thinking of doing something with the Scouts, the more senior ones, to build this when they're out and about. It's just an assembly unit. But mine is the carcass of become a signal tracer. So got to build the probe yet, but the base amplifier's already built and it works very well. Next thing is, once again, I dug out something I built nearly 20 years ago and it never worked. And as I keep telling you, I work next to another amateur, and I took it into work because sometimes I go into work before we really open, and him and I sit there and do all sorts of things and experiment before we start work. And I said, "There, this is this soft rock SDR transceiver, but it's never worked." And he said, "Yeah, I built one of those about 20 years ago, and mine never worked either." So I'm trying to get that working. It'll be interesting to see if it works, but hey, a bit of fun. And last but not least, I've spent a reasonable amount of time on VHF and UHF, and some of it on the talk group, as well as some of it on straight VHF and UHF, and having a reasonable amount of fun. I'm not really an HF person, but as I keep saying, I really ought to do a bit. I've got the gear to do it. I really ought to do it. So that's where I've been. So all in all, that's what I've been up to, mainly playing. Oh, there's one other thing I will tell you guys, and I came across this a little by accident, is there's a piece of software on the internet. And if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, I'll apologise. But this thing's called Tinkercad, and it's designed to probably more for children or education market, and it's has two functions. You can either design things for a 3D printer, or you can do electronic stuff on it. So it's got a complete electronics emulator for Arduino. So you can do things without an Arduino, but potentially you can put an Arduino board on the screen. You can wire it up exactly the same as you would a physical hardware one. You can add modules to it. You can write your code, and you can test it in a virtual environment, or test simple circuits in a virtual environment. So, I played a little bit with that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, I'm sorry, but Tinkercad, it's written by AutoCAD or Autodesk, which were the people who originally produced AutoCAD, the very, very expensive CAD software of a good few years back. So just an interesting one you might be interested in. On that note, all that's left for me to do now is thank the guys for turning up, and we'll continue with the rest of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Well, thank you, Martin. I'm very happy to be part of episode 400.
Yeah, great. And say we made it to 400. I'd like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
It's been fun planning episode 500 as we speak.
Yeah, 500. Well, I'm going to be quite an old man by then. I'd like to thank... Hey?
No comment.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
Martin, it's really a real pleasure to be on the podcast and on here for the 400th episode. And just so you know, over here across the pond, we're all called Old Man after Hiram Percy Maxim.
Yeah, well, I don't worry about it, Frank, but I think I'll be mid-70s by the time we get to 500. But hey, I'm still young at heart. I'll still terrorise the airwaves. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Thanks for the invite, Martin, and apologies if my voice was a bit croaky tonight.
No apologies necessary, Leslie. Thanks for joining us tonight, and most
Cheers.
appreciated. And Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B, obviously you heard earlier, had to leave us. He was on a hard stop. So thanks again, Bill, for joining us. So all that's left for me to do is say 73's, guys, and we'll continue with the podcast. 73.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BLY. We start off with news here from Ed Shefek, I think it's pronounced. Sorry, Ed, I always struggle with your surname. Whiskey X-Ray 2 Romeo. He's part of the Fair Lawn Amateur Radio Club, and he's contacted to let us know about the continuing work they're doing in partnership with the West Palm Beach Radio Group. And they've held a series of HF Club contacts in February and March this year. This is an extension of their unique one-year partnership that started late last year, when they began sharing ideas, activities and best practices to encourage the growth and development of each other's amateur radio club, and have also extended their fraternal relationship by participating in Club Next programs, newsletters, initiatives such as youth and new member development, etc. Both clubs are enthusiastic about the new relationship and say very satisfied so far with the progress they made. Experiments in slow scan television were part of the March HF contact exchange. So say the two groups, the guys at West Palm Beach have about 18 members currently at the moment, and the the Fair Lawn group have 225 members. So good collection there, 300 members there between the two of them, as they working away nicely from there. We're going to put links to both clubs, etc., on the ICQ podcast webpage, and I'm sure people that have been focusing a lot on hubs and clubs, etc., will be really interested to see how this wonderful collaboration has helped grow interest in the hobby in the area and develop both clubs at the same time. So many thanks, Ed, for letting us know about what's going on. We finish up with news in the UK. Ofcom has published a statement on its proposed plan of work for the year 2023 to 2024. The statement described plans for a review of amateur licensing arrangements according to the document. Consultation on the work is planned for the first quarter of the year. A subsequent statement is scheduled for the fourth quarter of the year. Once more details are available, as everybody will be able to review the consultation and provide guidance to how this may or may not affect amateurs and how to respond. So, as always, we've got a link to the statement in full from the Ofcom website for you to check out, and it'd be good to get your head around what's going on there, just see if what's affect you from there. Right, we're going to head to our features episode now, and this is a recollection of our memories and thoughts and experiences from producing 400 episodes of the ICQ podcast with our team. Now, just to let you know, as a couple of our colleagues, Karen and Martin Rothwell, couldn't join us on the record, so we're going to cut their bits into the recording. We also wish to extend our best wishes and speedy recovery to our friend and colleague Ed Durant, DD5D and Papa, who unfortunately is ill this week and wasn't able to join us, but he's a very valued member of the team, and as I say, it's a shame we couldn't get him involved in this recollection, but as I say, best thing to do is if you catch him at Friedrichshafen in June, I'm sure you can ask him of his recollections and his thoughts and feelings, etc. While also in the meantime, we'll all spend our thoughts for his speedy recovery. So as always, guys, hope you enjoy the feature.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys. A slightly different feature this time. A very slightly different feature. We thought for our 400th episode, we'd just come along and tell you about ourselves, how we got involved in the podcast, and nicely, some of the things that we've been involved with and our best experiences. So tonight, at the moment, I've got Edmund M1MRB.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Edmund. I've also got Colin M6BOY, their founder.
Hi all, how are you? Hi, how you doing, guys?
Yeah, good, Colin. I've got Frank K4FMH.
Hey, and glad to be here, everybody.
Yeah, good to have you, Frank. Leslie G0CIB.
Good evening, Martin. Thanks for the invite again.
Yeah, no problems. Bill WC3B. Yeah, hopefully you'll unmute.
Good evening, Martin, and everyone else.
Yeah, good to hear you, Bill. And Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Good evening again for this episode.
Yeah. And we're going to put Colin's nose out of joint because I have the boss sitting next to me. Say hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mrs.
Is
B.
that Mrs. B?
Good evening.
That is
She makes wonderful. What was that?
shepherd's pie.
Shepherd's pie. That's a wonderful shepherd's pie. Thank you, Mrs. B.
That's all right. You're welcome.
Yeah. And she does a good job at managing our stand in the UK. Carol often comes with us. You're not an amateur, are you, dear? But
I'm not an amateur.
no interest, really, have you?
No, just Colin likes my apple crumbles.
Yeah, so Colin
Ooh.
comes over and here, you have to make
That needs to be importable.
Yeah. So I thought I'd ask Carol to join us tonight, just so, because some of you have met her, some of you have spoke to her, and some of our listeners will have met her at shows where she has the habit of telling everybody that she's the boss. So,
It's true.
Of course, it's true.
yeah.
The truth will set you free.
There you go.
Yeah. So, Colin, do you want to pick it up from now?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, that's because one of the things we're going to talk about is how we all got involved in the show. So, I suppose a brief history on the early part of the show. Some listeners would have heard this. I think we did this back a few hundred episodes ago, but some of you may be new since then, might not know the story. So, in essence, here I am living in Ireland. For those of you who don't know, approximately about 400 miles away from Dad in London, and I'm listening to these audio shows across the internet, and these things called podcasts, and I'm sitting on on the sofa going, geez, I'd love to give this a go. This looks really interesting. And I phone up Dad and I say, hey, do you know what a podcast is? And you answer no. And I say, well, and I describe what a podcast is, and I say, I fancy doing a podcast, but the things I know about, which are football or soccer, as you would call it in the States, and technology, has already told those already. That radio thing you do, we could do a show on that. And he said, yeah, okay, son, I'll help you out, no problems at all. And he says, but on one condition, you've got to get a license. So, okay, sounds fair enough. And we agreed to do 10 episodes. And, as you can gather, a lot less than the 400 we're now at now. But that's really how the show started off for the pair of us, didn't it? In essence, it was one phone call, one thought of, well, we could do this, and and here we are 400 episodes later.
Certainly was. And in fairness, I will always support you, as you well know. That one phone call was quite interesting because on that day, you wanted to set up the domain name. And why did we call it ICQ Podcast? Well, you pressured me very quickly and said, you've got to have a name now. I've got to set this domain up. And I went, I haven't a clue. And then I suddenly thought the Morse code thing of I seek you. And I wasn't even aware there was a messaging system called ICQ at the time. And we set up the I Seek You podcast. And that's how it all came about. Terribly bad audio in the early days, Colin, but we learned all along the way, didn't we?
Oh, didn't we? And of course, and the other question we got asked a lot is why orange? And that came about by another happy coincidence that we'd picked a background or picked an image, and it came in 4 colours. Red, which we signify for danger. Green was very environmental from a previous background in publishing I had. Blue being water, again, from a previous publishing background. And the 4th colour was orange. And we chose orange because there was no other reason not to choose it, basically. And that's how the orange logo, the orange background, and etc. Came about. So it was another happy coincidence along the way. But as I say, through time, I say we opened up opportunities for other people to get involved. And as I say, our friends and colleagues who are on the show with us today, as I say, took up the option to get involved, and as I say, helped us, I suppose, expand what we do and create this lovely family club hub, call it whatever you want to call it, but it's created this great trans world covering team of ours.
Yeah, we did. Now, one of the things that Frank and us were all discussing was who was the third person to join the podcast on a regular input. Now, Ed Durant used to be our Australian correspondent when he lived in Australia, and when he moved to Germany, he became a German correspondent. But Frank seems to think, Leslie, you were the first full-time presenter to join the team after Colin and I. So you got involved because of an argument with our National Society, didn't you?
Oh, that was a long time ago, Martin. Do you know what? I'm born in Yorkshire, so we're not natural diplomats. I got a refund on the diplomacy course, but I'll try my best. Yes, there was a difference of opinion, and I'm going to say now there were some people there that I absolutely adored, and they were great to work with. I'm going to just name a few. Giles, unfortunately, Silent Key, God bless him. Elaine, I got on very, very well indeed. Ian White, thank you for the contribution, Ian. It was fantastic. The technical forum and the propagation studies, I really enjoyed working with everyone there. However, this particular issue came along, and I believe you invited me on your show, and I thought, you know what, I got the bit between the teeth, and I admit that. It didn't go my way, but that's life. And there was, shall we say, a bit of communication from people that will remain nameless forevermore. And at that point, my membership went elsewhere, and I took my skills and knowledge to another very, very successful organisation, and I'm staying with them. So it happened. That's just life, Martin. Over to you.
Yeah, but in nicely, I knew you as an RSGB board member.
I was, yes.
Yeah, but hardly, in reality, when you honestly look at it, the national societies are lucky to have more than 25% of the amateurs in a country in them. And you are now far more known worldwide than ever you would be at the RSGB.
What happened was there was a notice at the police station, and it says "wanted" over the top. That's what really done it.
Yeah. Hang on. The boss is having a giggle here. But yeah, in fairness, you are well known, and you upset what went on.
Martin, I do what I think's right at the time. Sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong, and that's me. And I mean, no apologies for that. We're all different, and we all, hey, that's what I am.
Yeah. So, what's your favourite highlight of being part of the ICQ?
Well, apart from that time that I was at one of the naval bases, and I was drinking away, and there was a Queen's shilling right at the bottom of this pint. The next time I was dragged onto this ship called the ICQ, and I think that's the way we used to do it in this country. But
come on, you enjoy yourself.
It's difficult to point out a highlight, Martin, and it's fun. And I know you work shifts as well, and sometimes people don't realise. I mean, I used to work shifts, and it used to be dreadful. But you get home and you're tired, and you stick your head under the shower and try and be human, and you look in the mirror and say, "I can't fix that." And then you come on the show and you just go for it. And it's been fun, and you find time just goes so quickly discussing various bits in the amateur radio and the news and what's occurring. And sometimes we have the discussions before. I've got to say this to listeners: the discussions before are absolutely hilarious, and that they're not even printable sometimes. But hey, it's all fun, Martin.
It certainly is.
The one thing that I'm really chuffed about, and I've got to thank one person for this, is when we did that thing on RF safety. There was a lot of work going into that. A lot of people said it was never going to come and it's not going to happen, and I just knew in my gut from the information I saw it was coming, and I thought, you know what, let's do something about this. And sure enough, it did come. Now, I know a lot of people don't agree with it here, but it did come, and it's now part of the license.
Yeah, certainly is, and that's a good one. Well, as I say, we enjoy having you on board, and you are asked after. At lots of rallies, people say, "Where's Leslie?" Yeah, they ask about you all the time. So there you go.
I'm around. I just go incognito, so nobody notices me.
Yeah. Now, probably the number 2 person then, because he decided he was number 2, is our Frank. Now, Frank, I remember you. We looked for an American correspondent that would tell us what was going on in America, and I remember you doing what was almost a mini podcast for the best part of about a year, and then things got busy for you, and you took a break, and you did some work with some other people, and then we had a conversation. And you came back, and I think that was great from my point of view. But I don't want to spoil your thunder, mate. Tell us about yourself and how it went for you.
Well, at a previous episode, I misreported that I was the 3rd member, but beyond Martin and Colin. And I think as you look back on your own history, there's a halo there, and clearly it was. I actually went back to the archives of all of our podcasts, and I appeared for the first time on the 5th of May, 2013, in then season 6, episode 9. The feature was a ham radio beacon project. I had responded to a comment, Martin, that you'd made, as you just indicated, that you might be in the market for someone from across the pond over in the States. And I emailed you a time or two, and we began interacting that way. And so when you brought me on, my background had been in broadcasting back, when I was 20, 21 years old. And so I had a little bit of a background there and had done some other projects and voiceovers over the years while I was a college professor. So I did this segment. I had an intro that included an homage to a British Butler voice. And I don't know if anybody caught it, but I called him Alfred. Well, if you're familiar with the Batman series, his... I don't know if he called him Butler, but his assistant there, Alfred, a British voice. I used a digital voice for that. And I gave highlights in that to a small number of news stories. We select them for the ICQ podcast. Well, I did the same. And we do them much better now with 4 U.S. presenters. I'd used a little bit of a segment on bad hams, where we had people doing things they shouldn't have done, and I'd tune around and capture some audio, and then feature some good ham behavior. And I'd close it with a brief feature segment. Might have been a book review, might have been something else, as well as a commentary. And I think it bode well for our future relationship. I would close my segment with turning it back over to Martin, that commoner, and Colin, the Irish rover, since he had moved to Ireland. And we've had a great friendship ever since. Now, that segment, 30 to 40 minutes, would take about 4 hours to produce, soup to nuts, ideas, research, the whole thing. And I'd transfer the finished audio file up to Colin's FTP server, and then he would use it from there. I reflected on this as I went back and listened to some of those, and what I was doing, bits and pieces of it, are really the model for the current ICQ podcast. And we do news, we do features, and things like that. I was recruited to be editor-in-chief at Springer Media, a large scientific publisher in the Netherlands, and I just couldn't keep up the schedule and kind of withdrew. But Martin said, who else over in the States would you recommend? And I said, Martin, there's this guy up in Michigan, Dan Romanchek. He's writing a really interesting blog, and he calls it like he sees them. And I'm glad, I know everyone else is glad, that, Martin, you brought Dan on as another one for the U.S. correspondent. Now, I worked with a couple of other podcasts, co-hosted Ted Randall's QSO Live on the now defunct WTWW shortwave station near Nashville, and co-hosted with Tom Medlin the W5KUB.com interview show. And I could just show up and be on mic, and I could fit that into my schedule. But as I retired from being editor, I think, Martin, you had found out about that, and you contacted me and invited me to rejoin the podcast team, and that you had changed the format. So I've been here ever since, and couldn't be happier.
Yeah, well, as I say, it was fun. Highlights. You've probably got the same highlight as me, Bill, and most of the team, but what's the highlight you think of being part of the ICQ for yourself?
Well, for me, it's the camaraderie that all the presenters have. I mean, not that we don't hold different views on news subjects. If we all looked at the news alike, it'd be pretty boring, right? I mean, it'd be very repetitious. But we look at things like you look into a diamond. You see different facets. And each of us does different things in the hobby. So we bring a lot of different perspectives there. But we've never let any difference become a divisive part of the podcast. And in fact, teasing is almost always a good a sign of good relationships. And we do that, don't we, Leslie?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, like you said, I may have a view on things, and especially from our American friends, I get a different view on how they look at things. And I think, well, actually, I didn't look at it that way. So we're taking something on, we're learning. And I think that's really good, you know. It's really, really good indeed.
It is, and it's a little unusual. You'll see, folks on podcasts and they suddenly disappear, and then you find out by word of mouth there was a disagreement. Now, I will add this, Martin, about this. Of course, when you guys came over to Dayton, I got to meet not only the folks from across the pond in the UK and in Germany, in Ed's case, but I got to meet our American presenters as well, and enjoyed that very much. For example, Ed and I got to know one another over an egg sandwich at breakfast in Dayton. We spent about an hour and a half, and I think we sort of built a bond there. And Ed and I can talk about a given topic. It may be an email or what have you, and we'll bash each other over the head. We thrash out a resolution that we agree or we don't agree, and here's why. But we're good friends, and I value Ed's candor greatly like that. And we've gotten on ever since, and the same with other team members. And I'll add that, Martin. Each of us is part of a team that you and Colin have built and maintained, and that we feeling is an integral part of any group, and that's the ICQ podcast to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the other good thing is, and I see a lot of podcasts have started up, they've got as far as episode 7 and they've fallen by the wayside. I think the advantage we have is if we don't we do a podcast because we don't want to let each other down. Now, all right, there are times when people are ill or family occasions and presenters can't make it, including me. I've missed one. Well, I didn't miss one. I worked on it, but I wasn't on the on air. But the thing is, it's a matter of not wanting to let your partners down, your colleagues down. And that way, if you do it on your own, you sit there and you think, can't be bothered to do it. I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. And then things fall by the wayside. So I think that's good that we work that way. Right, guys. Well, I'm with Karen tonight. And Karen, unfortunately, couldn't make the big recording session. But Karen, wonderful to have you on board with us tonight and joining us on the 400th episode.
Well, I have to tell you, Martin, I appreciate you accommodating me, and I was really excited about this episode. So it's super to be a part of it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, to say, I think, Karen, you've dropped into the team and become a valid member of the team, as I always hope, and the chemistry's right. And one of the things, and I know Ruth can't make at the moment, her education is far more important than the podcast. But one of the things I always had, every time I tried to get a lady to join our team, was usually they had a husband who was an amateur. And that amateur used to stand behind them telling them what to say. I know that your lovely other half doesn't do that to you because he's not an amateur, but it's nice that you have your own personal opinion and you've joined and made a big contribution to us.
Well, I want to give him a shout out, if I may, Martin, on a couple of fronts. First, I'll tell you something very funny. In the very beginning, when I became a ham, he would listen to the sounds coming from the rig, and he bought a bullhorn that distorts the voice, and he would stand behind me when I would be receiving somebody coming back on the radio, and he would basically mimic it through the bullhorn, mocking me, and it cracked me up. But he's not hostile to ham radio by any means, and he reminds me too that when he served in the U.S. Army and was overseas, he was responsible for some of the radar over there. So he says it baffles him why he's not into it, but he's not. But he can appreciate that I am. That's shout out number one. I want to give him a shout out number two, because as you know, I'm more into CW lately, like big time, and seriously into POTA, seriously into going into the parks. And he went out with me on an activation about 2 weeks ago. Since it's still pretty cold here in New York, I wanted to activate a new park, and this was Sunken Meadows State Park, which is waterfront park overlooking the coast of Connecticut. It's just beautiful. But I said to him, look, I'd like to go to the park. Maybe we can do some hiking afterward. And he said, oh, that would be great. I said, come with me, come hang out, So I put the ham stick on the roof of the car, and we were off and running with being parked and with me hammering away on that straight key. And bless his heart, he sat in the front seat the whole time because it was too cold, really, for him to be outside. I said, all you're gonna hear is Morse code. He says, I'm good with that. I'll just sit in the front and read. So for an hour, I was picking up POTA contacts. He was listening to these dits and das for full 60 minutes or more, me pounding away, and he was quietly reading off of his Kindle, being a good guy, and it was wonderful. So you can't ask for more than that. He's not an ICQ podcast listener, but maybe I'll play this episode for him because I so appreciate him.
Yeah, he sounds a good guy. Well, I'm going to give you a little secret now. When I put calls through the ICQ podcast digital talk group, if Mrs. B's in the room, I sometimes say this M1MRB listening the ICQ podcast talk group, and she'll say, "Oh no, he isn't." I think, every time. We have to have a bit of fun now and again.
You really do, and you know what? It sort of makes it fun. If you were both hams, you might be fighting for the use of the rig. So it works out for a peaceful conclusion.
Yeah, and the other thing is that if you're both into the same things and you both do the same things all the time, it means that you haven't got anything to talk about. Whereas, whereas I know Mrs. B could pass an amateur radio exam probably very easily. She's been around me for a long time. She does give Colin a bit of earache now and again over things, but in fairness, she doesn't want to do it, and I respect her for it. And
Yep, that's right. As long as you've got that support. I mean, I come rushing into the room wherever he is to let him know I just contacted Australia or New Zealand, and I'm ecstatic. I just thrilled. And he'll tease me, but I think he appreciates how excited I am.
Yeah. So, Karen, let me ask you. Before you joined us, you did a few guest appearances. I know you did other podcasts, and you are the editor for Amateur Radio Newsline. You accepted pretty quick when I said, Karen, do you want to join us? What made you jump so quick to join us?
Well, you have something that is really appealing to me in this podcast. You've got a great team. I mean, that's so much fun to be with everybody. And best of all, not only do we not agree with one another, we make that lack of agreement fun. It's mutual respect, it's fun, it's exchange of ideas. It gives me the ability to do something that Newsline as a newscast does not give me. News is news. You deliver the news event, you say what happened, and you move on. I think ICQ podcasts, in addition to just having a fun group of people, and it's fun, Martin, or you wouldn't be you wouldn't be doing it this long. It gives me the ability to breathe. I can breathe. I can talk. I can relax with these stories. I can dig into them a little more deeply and explore the issues, explore the implications, and I can hear everybody else's opinion, not just here in the States, but on the world stage. I think that's fabulous. Oh, of course, I ask me a question, can I do something? And is it related to amateur radio? And will I have the time for it? Well, if I don't have the time, 9 times out of 10, I'll make the time, Martin. So I think you were pretty much guaranteed that I would happily join this team.
Well, I'm glad you did, Karen, because, as I say, I think you bring a lot to the podcast, and you have some very interesting thoughts at times, a different perspective on things. I don't think that, I always refer to us as a big family, and we pretty much are. Not everybody gets on with everybody. There have been words between one or two of us at odd times, but that's what a family's like. And it all calms down and everybody gets on and everybody's happy in the end. So that's a good one. So one of the questions that Colin was hoping to ask you, but you've only been with us a few months, and it was, is there a highlight of being with the ICQ podcast that's brought to you, something that really sticks in your mind?
Wow. I think rather than one defining moment, I think the highlight for me has simply just been the dynamic, which there's a part of the dynamic that rears its head every now and again, and you alluded to it. It's when people don't agree. And I'm sitting and listening to this and going, oh boy, oh boy, this is going to go someplace rough. We're in choppy waters here. But it never does go there. And I think for me, that the high point is just the fact that it reminds me again and again of what you just said, Martin, that this is a family. It's the same spirit of amateur radio that, we're all hams. We may not have the same politics. I'm a vegetarian, you may be a meat and potatoes person. We're not all cookie cutters of one another. And for me, the high point comes with that discovery every single time I'm part of the round table that it doesn't matter. Our differences just don't matter because we offer one another so much. because of our differences.
Yeah. Well, there's one last thing I want to say, and I don't think it's ever going to happen, Karen, unless I win the lottery. But to get all of us together in one place would be nice. We got 8 of us together once in Dayton. Getting the whole team together is going to be extremely difficult, but we get together fairly regularly on air, and just because a member of one group, there is cross-fertilisation, and as I say, we can work with each other, which is good. So that's my only regret. I don't ever see it happening that we get all 12, 14 of us, whatever many it is, together, and just be together.
Well, be hopeful. Be hopeful, and I'll tell you why. There is precedent. There's absolute precedent in that. The first year I went to Dayton, we got, I would say, 80% of the Newsline team decided they were going to make the trip. Of course, most of us based here in the States. I mean, none of our European folks could come, and from down under, nobody could make it. So that we were missing them. But we all did show up, and it was funny because we were working together for a while by then, and the thought came up, oh, what if we see one another and we don't like one another? And we were laughing, and of course somebody said, well, I already don't like you, so that's not a problem. And we were joking about it, but the bottom line is this, we all got hotel rooms near one another. We had a lot of fun. We even pranked one of our team members by I thought we would steal the toilet roll from from his room and make him wonder where it was. We left a large unicorn suit, adult-sized costume on somebody's bed. We were being crazy. So that long story is prefaced to this, that the year you went to Dayton, a bunch of you went to Dayton. I was supposed to go and couldn't, and we would have met then. I mean, I haven't even met Dan, and he's right here in the States. I haven't met Frank. But it could happen. I really think it could, and I hope it will. If not well, it would have to probably be Dayton. I can't imagine where else it would be.
Yeah. I mean, Dayton is the classic, but yeah, I did some good thoughts on that. Well, Karen, I'm not going to take you too long because this is a weekend and extra record for you, but thank you for telling us your experiences on the podcast.
Well, it's my pleasure. I hope that I will be with the podcast for a long time to come, and that I can continue to enjoy everything about it. I'll always be a listener, but it's certainly nice to be a part of this great team.
Yeah. Thanks.
Happy 400 to all of us.
Chris, you, as a member of Sutton and Cheam, like I am, and like Martin Rothwell is, who's having to work tonight, I looked for, I knew you and Martin, and you might have almost become my adopted, well, you pretty much become my adopted sons, but
I don't ever do that.
hang on, Mrs. B's disown it. No, not true. Not true.
Mrs. B.
Over to you, Chris.
Well, yeah, I mean, I for me, the podcast is almost mirrors my amateur radio career, I suppose. So as you know, Martin, I started my career in amateur radio doing a foundation license training course at the Sutton and Cheam Club, and you were my instructor. And it kind of went from there, really. So, over the years, you've kind of been my mentor, my Elmer, learned an awful lot from you. And one Monday evening in the car park, as we often have a chat, he said, Chris, do you want to fancy, because I kind of was aware of the podcast and I've heard a few episodes, he said, do you fancy joining, coming on board? I'm like, yeah, well, I'll give it a go. And I have no idea when that was. It must be 10 years ago, maybe, I'm not sure. And the rest is sort of history, I suppose. And I mean, for me, I suppose I really as Frank was saying, that visit to Dayton and meeting everyone together was great. You know, meeting the Frank and Bill and Dan and the guys was great. But I also really like meeting our listeners. I really love going to events, the Newark and lots and lots of events, Friedrichshafen, Dayton, those sorts of events. I really like doing interviews with people, and we've sort of built we've made some good friends, not just within the podcast, but also having an orange microphone is quite a nice way to go and actually talk to people. People want to talk to you, or most of the time people want to talk to you. So, going to events like Friedrichshafen where you've got loads of people there all in the same hobby, you can walk up to someone, have a chat with them, and just record the conversation. And actually, I really enjoy that. So, I mean, I got friends with, work for Ellicraft and SDR Play and Seacom and Kenwood and lots of other, places around the world sort of thing. So it's a really, a bit like amateur radio. It's a really international fellowship is the podcast and the radio. I think certainly another highlight for me was our visit to the BBC. I know, Colin, you can come over for that one. And Mr. Rothwell was there as well. Martin Rothwell was there as well. And we, really got to meet the guys. And it was really, for me, to see this, a good tour around broadcasting house, seeing how it all works, to me was absolutely fascinating. And actually going to a radio, a professional radio studio for a national broadcaster was amazing. So that would be certainly one of the highlights, but many, many highlights. Same, I really enjoy meeting people, meeting our listeners, going to those events for me is certainly, what I like to do, I suppose.
I think the other interesting thing is not making this too much of a self-praising loving is particularly seeing you develop and grow a skill of interviewing and being in, with a microphone in your hand at shows, and now being in front of camera sometimes when we're doing the video work, etc. I mean, let's be honest, not many of us have got really any radio background or any interviewing journalistic background in some respects, and how we've grown and developed that skill. Just really with that great premise of we're asking the questions that we would expect other people to want to ask if they were in our shoes, type of thing, and how that's allowed us to grow nicely. I
think you're right, Colin. I mean, I'm not sure. I know Frank has, but certainly the rest of us, I don't think have any formal training in any of this stuff really, and we've just sort of. I imagine some of the early ones are pretty ropey, but and I used to sort of write questions down and have a bit of a script, and now you just sort of turn up and think about, like you say, think about what listeners might want to ask and try to ask the right questions, and hopefully it's interesting and entertaining for our listeners. Yeah,
I think the thing here, Chris, is as Colin said, we've all grown. The first time I had to do live interviews in front of a massive audience, and I wasn't too worried because I have done presentations, but I wasn't worried. But I was at the wall, the QSO wall at Friedrichshafen, and Colin had arranged us to meet some of our listeners. And it was like, well, thrust the microphone in your hand, Martin, off you go. And I'm, okay. But
that's called skilled delegation. That's what that is.
All right. But, it's been good fun. And in fairness, I'll tell you two very serious things. Chris, believe it or not, Eric from Ellicraft has taken me aside and said, you are the favourite person he likes to talk to in the media, because you and he seems to think that you and him bond quite well, and you don't give him a hard time. You allow him to tell his story. And let's face it, most people want to know. They don't want to see us being smart asses, do they? So
that's nice to hear, and I think you're right. I think we're not going to go and sort of come with a very adversarial interview. We're there to get the people's story, aren't we? So we know about have a little chat before and just have a little think about what we might want to talk about, and then it's just like, let's go, and we're just in. Hopefully, it's fairly conversational. It's just a chat, and we just record it, and hopefully that comes across, on the podcast.
Yeah, certainly does. Certainly does. Right, let's ask Bill. Bill, you joined us. I can't remember how you joined us, Bill, and I'm terribly sorry. I know you've been with us a long time. So, how did we rope you in?
Fired. Colin, fire him for not remembering. It's actually
don't give him the opportunity, Billy. Take it.
I actually joined by accident. You and Colin had the end of a chat, that end part you always do, and you were talking about features. And I misunderstood when you said, hey, if you have an idea for a feature, drop us a note at info@icqpodcast.com, and we'll put it in the list of things we might record features on. I actually sent you 2 chunks of audio. We renovated one of our student studios at work, because I work at a higher ed institution in Pennsylvania, into basically a podcast recording studio. So I went in there a couple times to record a few things, make sure the technology works, and make sure that the equipment was set up. And I helped the folks and the professors, fill out the basics on how to use the equipment, the little cheat sheets and diagrams and stuff that we had. And so I did 2 features for one for episode 237 and one for episode 238. I remember it was... the first one I did was on RTTY, because still to this day, my favorite digital mode is RTTY. That's RTTY for the folks that don't put in the phantom I in there. And I recorded like 7 or 8 minutes about this end-fed half-wave antenna I was using for SOTA at the time. Because there was another, I think Ed Durant did that one a couple episodes before, where he was talking about his link dipole, which works really well. But I also had pretty good luck with the end-fed half-wave. So I recorded like 7 or 8 minutes of audio and shipped it off to you guys. And then a few weeks later, Martin gave me a Skype call, and we had a chat, and you brought me into one of the round tables, and I think I started around episode 240. And so, I think that's one of the things that, when you talk about longevity, I think, the people we're really beating up here is just Colin and Martin. Everyone else, it's 2 teams. So we switch in and out, and therefore it doesn't seem like it's continuous. So I think that's part of the reason why you keep us. Once you get us in, you keep us.
Well, I think it's because we're a we act as a family. But the other thing is, when we went over to the news roundtable system, and I'll bring Edmund in a minute. Edmund, sorry, I haven't forgotten about you. When we went over to the roundtable, we went there for a reason, in that Colin's internet suddenly fell apart, and we had a choice. We either canned the podcast, or we reorganised, and we all got reorganised with the news roundtable. And one of the things I was conscious of is, if you were asked to do it, presenters were asked to do it too often, you can get bored. But number 2, if we got 2 teams, and neither team is the A or the B team, let's be honest, if you have 2 teams, then you've got different voices and different opinions. And as time goes through, it's worked out well for us. But we were fairly close to having to close it then, weren't we, Colin?
Yeah. It got that bad. I mean, the joke is the cows pointed in the wrong way and my internet connection failed. But it's quite mad when you're in a world now of gigabit connections to the house and the rest of it, that we were running the show on what was a 5 megabit connection, which was a good 5 meg connection until the next village came on to broadband, and just the quality of the line fell apart. And there wasn't any other real easy options with time zones, work commitments, etc., that we could easily fall back on. And up to that point, the podcast was quite a therapeutic thing. And I think I'm sure you don't mind me saying this, but there have been times in our life that you and I have both gone through over the last nearly 15 years. We've both gone through bumps and scrapes, but it's usually the fact that one goes for a bump and a scrape when the other one's on a high. And then that person is going through that little bit of a bad spell. The other person pulls them through, and the podcast is lovely constant that keeps us keeps us moving forward. We've had periods of time we've been at work, jobs not worked out well, etc. Maybe health blips, whatever it be. But the podcast has been this constant where the other person's always been able to drag the other one along. When one person's feeling down and maybe thinking about, maybe it's time to move on and do something else, the other person is there to pick that person up and sort of go from there. So we had that obviously for that sort of first, 200 and something episodes, and then obviously the internet crash happened. And I really think what we ended up with is rather than it just being you and I, but using it as a tool to heal ourselves at times we need to, is we now have this wonderful family, this wonderful group. I would suggest all have those times where they maybe are down and other colleagues can help and pick them up, and also at the same time enjoy the comfort of all being part of a bigger group. So we've extended that option on to the bigger team as that has come about, and that all came about purely and simply by another village being given broadband at the time. And that was the big change in the show, and I would suggest greatly that that's what's probably got us to 400 is the fact now that the ideas and the voices and the opinions and the friendship and the camaraderie has helped us get to this wonderful as a celebration of 400 episodes.
Yeah, it certainly has.
How did I join the ICQ podcast? Short answer, it was Netflix that opened the door to the show, or other video streaming services. But if I leave it at that, this is going to be a very short piece of audio. So let me elaborate just for one moment. Let's fire up that flux capacitor, jump back in time a bit, and in typical ICQ way, and ironically Back to the Future style way as well, skew off at a tangent as I'm trying to work out. But I reckon I came on board as a regular contributor about 9 years ago, in what I think was around episode 169. We were counting in series numbers at that point as well. I think it's only from about 200 that we started counting is sequential. Although I had recorded a couple of features previously to that, so it was around about 9 years ago I joined. But of course I wouldn't have joined had I not had the fascination for radio. I learned about radio initially. My first sort of concept of any kind of wireless energy was the remote control that my granddad demonstrated for his TV. My brother's radio controlled car, of course, the invisible energy that intrigued me at the age of maybe 5 or 6. And then sometimes in the late 80s, I got a set of headset walkie-talkies as a birthday present from Handy's own brand at the time, I think it was, operating around 49 megahertz. And, of course, CB, the natural successor. And don't tell the RA. But I saw, as an innocent bystander, of course, I saw a friend's SSB CB radio. And I knew I wanted to learn more about this tech. I'd heard of amateur radio. A friend's father had got amateur radio. I knew what it was, had never tried it. So I joined Sutton and Cheam Radio in early 2000s, 2000, 2001, something like that. That was the local club, and the idea was I was going to try and find somewhere that I could do the course. I couldn't find that. There wasn't anything really going on in the area at the time. I did attend many talks, including an interesting visit to the police headquarters in Guildford. That was absolutely fascinating, learning about their radios. But a lot of them were over my head. I stayed a member for about a year or so. But it was about that time that I first met Martin, and I think he was only in his 80s at the time. I'm kidding, Martin. Sorry. But it was about that time that I met Martin. And then I left, just left because a lot of the talks were over my head, and I wasn't really in a position to travel or to learn the RAE at the time. Now, jump forward a few years, I got my licence in 2008, and at the time I rejoined Sutton and Cheam Radio Society. And although the first person I met at that point was less than welcoming, another person stepped in, recognised me as new, and told me to ignore him. I then went to the bar, and I recognised Martin and said hello, and he insisted on buying me a drink because he also recognised me as new. And we started chatting, and I'll be honest, we've been friends ever since. In fact, he was the best man at my wedding on the pure understanding that he didn't have to wear pink. I did threaten it a couple of times, but he was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not wearing pink. But anyway, some years later, talk about the podcast came up, and I'd been working as a broadcaster since 2003, and I knew what a podcast was, but I didn't really know anything about how to listen to them. Radio stations hadn't picked up on the tech. They dismissed it as a fad, and in my head, I just couldn't understand why it wasn't easy as go to the website and press play, or just go to the website and download this MP3 file, which a few radio stations had done, but not many. And this was before podcatchers and things like that came pre-installed on people's phones, and before people like the BBC started building walled gardens. And I remember being invited to join a Skype call at the time with Colin, whose opening words, very tongue-in-cheek, by the way, said, "What's wrong with my website?" But he listened with interest, and this was the first time I met Colin. He took the point, made some changes to the website, and added a how to listen page, as well as a just press play. And from there, I started listening to the show, and I got a feel for the show and everything else. And through this, I was invited to join what was the coffee or beer show at this time, or in Leslie's case, tea with a pork pie floater. We'll get to that. And this is where Netflix stepped in, or other video streaming stepped in, and unknowingly helped me join the show. In short, Ireland's infrastructure, of course, Colin is located in Ireland, was absolutely fine until video on demand appeared. And Colin, unfortunately, couldn't get a reliable VoIP connection to do live records. Coffee or Beer show closed as a result of needing a live connection. And Martin asked myself and perhaps Chris around the same time if we would be willing to come on board to be sort of more regular presenters on the show. And I jumped at this, unsure if it was temporary until Colin could get a better connection or a more permanent thing. But either way, I'm a broadcaster. I love the sound of my own voice, so any airtime for me is good. And I've kind of been here ever since. Now, I do my best to lead Martin astray, not that he needs any encouragement. I should make that very, very clear. I always bait him when he's trying to remember someone's name, and I typically say it wrong a few times intentionally just to confuse him any times of an interview. And I'm always first in line to buy him his fourth coffee, as whoever gave him his third has already accepted full responsibility for him. And say, I've been here ever since. Where are we? Episode 400. I think I moved into this house maybe 5 years ago or something like that, and I remember recording a message for episode 200. So, yeah, we are coming along in leaps and bounds. But, yeah, I've been here ever since. What is my best experience from being involved in the show? Where do I start? I mean, that's like, how long's a piece of string? Well, we're all members of clubs, respective clubs, wherever we are in the world. But ICQ Podcast is almost a second unofficial club. And it's always great fun going to events, meeting with listeners. And sure, you always get someone that goes out of their way to tell you that they don't listen. And I just dismiss them as rude and walk away. But the concept that other people want to come and chat to us and even have photos taken with us is just so surreal. It's really proof that radio, or in this case podcasting, when you do it right, it really is an intimate medium, and people are choosing to listen to us and they're getting to know us through that medium. Now, we often attend shows, and when we stay away, it's always great fun. Being part of ICQ Podcast has opened up so many doors. We get to chat to the traders, the manufacturers, the dealers at a completely different level. We get to spend a lot more time with them than you might normally be able to do so. And we've built up a massive trust between us as individuals and as a podcast group and those people. And shows like the National Hamfest, they're always good fun. The banter over dinner is great, especially if we've had a few apple juices, shall we say. For example, this year we were in a restaurant and one of the big magazine editors walked in. Now, we know him, so of course we invited him to join us because, let's face it, everyone's up there. No one's necessarily coming with their family. They're not necessarily got people with them. So, hey, come and join us. And, of course, he accepted to come down and join us. And as soon as he did that, I couldn't resist the question. So you got your corporate credit card with you, haven't you? And I was joking, of course, but the look on his face for that split second was absolutely brilliant. And some of the other highlights to me, the pre-recorded chats, the stuff that doesn't make it to air. It doesn't always come across on air, but Leslie, for example, is absolute comedy gold. How he's not appearing on Live at the Apollo is beyond me. We joke about there being a couple of naughty toddlers in the show. Yes, there absolutely are. There's probably more than a couple. And we always said that we wouldn't keep cutting room floor stuff, or at least it would never make it to air. But some of it is too brilliant just not to keep sort of back in the archive and have a listen to occasionally. It's, the stuff that goes on in the background is always great fun. And finally, if you think about it, we all have hobbies that come and go in our lifetime. But being part of this show, as an amateur radio tech show, it encourages me to keep experimenting, playing with new tech, new features, new ideas. And you might recall me sort of dismissing DMR as rubbish a few years back. And I would still argue that had it not been for this show. But because, of course, Martin set up the talk group, I have since learnt how to use DMR. Now, of course, it's a learning curve compared to some of the other digital modes, but I've got my head around that, and actually, I quite like it. Had it not been for this show, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't be learning other tech. So, that in itself is a great experience. So I would ask you, just for a moment, if you could grab your glass. I've got the prop to hand. That's not a pre-recorded sound effect. That's genuine prop. And I would ask you to raise your glass to the next 100 Hang on. What is that? Leslie, why is there a cream egg floating in my cider? I'm joking, of course. He's not here. Although why there's a cream egg in there, I don't know. Anyway, next 100 episodes. Thank you, Colin. And thank you, Martin. We look forward to the next.
Edmonds, I seem to remember you hadn't got a clue who the ICQ podcast was until you met us in South London one Saturday morning, if I remember right.
You do remember, right? Yes. In 2012, the UK hosted the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. And to celebrate this, the Cray Valley Radio Society in southeast London put a special event station on the air. But because it was Cray Valley, it wasn't just any old special event station. It was a mega special event station. They had previous in that. They organised the one at the turn of the millennium. And I think I'm right in saying they're going to organise one in May of this year to commemorate the coronation of King Charles III. But the two Olympic 1-2 London, or 2 Oscar 1-2 Lima to give it its correct phonetic spelling, was unlike anything I'd seen before. They had an absolutely enormous antenna farm. I think they had dedicated antennas for every band that existed from top band through to 2 meters. They had the facility to run full legal limit on all bands, 400 watts here in the UK. And although they weren't quite a 24-hour-a-day operation, they were close to it. They often only went off air for a couple of hours overnight in the wee small hours. So I had read in Radcom or Practical Wireless that visitors were welcome, and as long as you held a UK licence of some description, Foundation, Intermediate or Full, you could bring along a copy of your licence and operate this station under supervision, which is what I did. I was an intermediate licence holder at the time, and they let me go on 40 metres, and I was on the other end of a pile up, the like of which I've never experienced before, ever. And incidentally, I think they're still, even now, more than a decade later, they are still the most successful special event station, certainly in the UK, in terms of the number of QSOs they made. And if I found out they were the world's most successful station, I would not be at all surprised. They could well still hold that record to this day. So I stuck a pin in a calendar and chose a Saturday completely at random, booked my train tickets online several months in advance, which meant I got a good deal and didn't have to pay very much. Made my way up to London, uninvited, unannounced, wandered in there and was made very welcome by the great and the good of the Cray Valley Radio Society. And after I'd been there a little while, some other people walked in, and they were Martin, Colin, Chris, and Colin's children, I think, from memory. And these fine people also had a go at operating the station. I think there is a video on YouTube somewhere, possibly on Chris's channel, M0TCH's YouTube channel, of Chris and Martin operating the station from memory. And we got talking. And I'd never heard of any of these people. I'd never heard of the ICQ podcast. So Martin gave me a little leaflet and I became a listener for the next 3 or 4 years. And I was in a similar position to Colin regarding the internet. But then in 2015, 2016, the internet here got a very big upgrade. Thanks mainly to my stepson, who enjoyed gaming amongst other things, and he found the internet connection we had to be intolerably slow, so we upgraded it. And I mentioned to Martin that meant perhaps I could contribute the odd feature now and again, or maybe pop up on a round table occasionally, by which I thought maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And Martin said, no, come on and jump on board and become a regular person. And the rest, as they say, is history. But the reason I'm telling you all of this mainly is to encourage everybody who's listening, if you have an opportunity to do something within amateur radio, or if you get an invitation to go to an amateur radio related event, if you can possibly say yes, then say yes, because as a direct result of you saying yes, something that is completely unimaginable to you today could happen to you months or years down the line even. When I was on the train travelling up to London, if you had told me that as a result of deciding to go to 2 Oscar 1-2 Lima that day, rather than just sitting on my rear end and staying at home, if as a result of that I would meet some great people, I would go to places that I'd never been, I would go to events that I'd never been to, and the absolute crowning highlight of that would be that I would end up visiting America for the first and so far only time ever. If you told me that, I would have probably laughed at you, and I would have said, come on, realistically, that's not ever going to happen, is it? And I would have been wrong. I would have been completely wrong. So if you take one thing away from anything that I've said, it's if anybody ever gives you an invitation to something or offers you an opportunity in amateur radio land, even if you think it's something that on paper isn't going to interest you particularly, just say yes and do it anyway, because you have no way of knowing what good ultimately might come of it. How about that, Martin?
Yeah, well, it's, I've listened, and we did meet at 2 Oscar 1-2 Lima, and it was a good day out.
But you know, it's evident as well that I always say the words, that we create opportunities. It's up to people to take them, and that's a great example of that, isn't it? That you get asked to do things in life, or opportunities come up, and a lot of people give us a lot of reasons why not to do something. It's too expensive, I don't have time, people think wrong on me, blah, blah, the rest of it. But if you take an opportunity, good things can come from it.
Certainly does. And before I go on to mention probably one of the most enjoyable things we've done as a group, I have to own up in that I really enjoy talking to listeners and people I know. Now, Colin and Chris can get very upset with me at the National Ham Fest because the toilets are at one end of the hall. If we're at the other end of the hall, it can take me an hour to go up and down the hall. And they're screaming at me, "Oh, you got an interview to do, you got an interview to do." Well, not so much now because Chris just gets on and does them. But I do enjoy meeting people I know. I've met a lot of interesting people in this hobby, not just the big names, but lots of people. And we are approachable. And I remember being at Newark one year. Now, I'm nothing special, I honestly, but I remember being there one year, and this guy came over to me and said, "My mate would love to talk to you, but he's too frightened. He thinks you're on another plateau." And I went, "What?" He says, "He's over there and he'd really love to talk to you, but he's a bit shy to come over." And I went over and had a chat with this guy. Thoroughly enjoyed, really nice guy. Nothing, no problems at all. So, do approach us. Yeah, we have the orange shirts on when we're working, but even if we're not working, we're still we're amateurs and we love to talk to you. And,
Martin, I have to say that my orange shirt for some reason has shrunk.
Is that too many brown lit nectars and pork pies?
It's due to the air conditioning in the room. It's affecting the material.
Yeah, Carol thinks it's you dunking your pork pies.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah. But, yeah, it's we do, the orange shirts really do spin us off. And, if I go to a rally where we're not there as the ICQ, if I go as to a normal rally out in the wilds of nowhere. If somebody spots me, it's like, where's your own shirt? Where's the microphone? Okay, right, I understand. But it is good fun. But Leslie, I know you didn't make this one, and maybe another time, but Dayton, I've got to say, Dayton, 8 of us managed to meet up out the group in Dayton. And in fairness, this poor lady that rented Colin the house must have been getting worried. There were 8 guys sharing a house. And I think she went in a little bit of a panic mode until you told her we were more senior people and would misbehave. Well, everybody else apart from Frank and me, anyway. But
just prove that story about not misbehaving. I don't know if you guys remember this. Do you remember the toilet broke on the second morning?
Yeah.
And 6 of us tried to fix it.
We did fix it.
And then I phoned her up to apologise that we couldn't fix it. And she was so impressed that we tried to fix a toilet for her that she called out a plumber on a Saturday morning to have it fixed me by the time we got back from the show.
We sort of fixed it, Cole. We fixed it in an amateur way. It worked a couple of flushes, shall we say.
Exactly. But that just shows the difference of mentality, isn't it? You know, the fact that, you know, there was people trying to fix the toilet. You know what I mean? Before we phoned up, saying, I'm really, really sorry. You know, this house you rented out, this historic house you rented out to 8 guys. Well, we broke your toilet, but we did try and fix it first.
Did you throw the telly out the window?
I don't know if there was a telly in the place. I don't remember seeing the telly, actually.
We didn't have time for the telly, Leslie, because we got in there quite late, and Frank, Bill, and Dan were there. And you sort of settled in, and we arrived quite late. And because we were all chatting, it was quite a late night. Then the following day, we went to the show. That night, you brought a rig, I think, if I remember right, Frank, and we operated in the front yard. And as people were going by, they were looking at us, and you said, "Oh, ham radio," and they go, "Oh, that's all right then," and off they went. And then the second night, I think we went to Cincinnati to see the big transmitter with amateur radio newsline guys. So
don't forget the chili.
Well, no, because amateur radio newsline boys get upset about that.
Still is
I
in
want
protest
to forget it.
of the chili.
You what, Bill?
My stomach is still in protest of the chili years later.
Yeah. No. You have to realise that Karen and Neil Flapp love that.
We'll upset Neil.
Yeah. Well, Karen likes it as well. And I believe Edmund liked the chili.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But then I have strange opinions.
Yeah.
So, you know, that house was on the historic register. And, you know, if you want to have a dream, maybe they'll add to that register in 100 years. Here is the spot where the ICQ podcast transmitted from at Dayton.
Oh, yeah. But Dayton was an absolute scream. And I've mentioned this a couple of times, but Martin Dew, lovely guy, owner of MFJ, really, really nice guy. And I can understand that 99% of all people want him and they're all trying to tap a freebie out of him, one thing or another. And the minute he realised we weren't trying to tap him up for something for free and we just generally wanted to talk to him, he was a gracious, lovely gentleman that you could spend hours with. And I would have loved to have spent more time with him. And equally, Bob Howell, you know, there was Bob, and at the time, TX Factor was not TX Factor. What was it?
Ham Nation.
Ham Nation, that's it. I had a brain seizure. Ham Nation were doing really well at that time, and I think you might have introduced me to him, Frank. And
I did, as well as Martin Dew.
Yeah. And Bob just turned around to one of his guys, took his phone out of his pocket, said to one of his guys on the stage, he said, "Deal with my phone." He said, "I'm with Martin for the next 20 minutes. And he said to me, "Martin, let's go down and we're standing in front of this piece of equipment and people think I'm trying to sell it to you and one thing and another and they'll leave us alone. And we had a chat. And Bob's not that much older than me, let's be honest, but it was like having a chat with your dad. He was very gracious and very interesting guy to talk to, and a real nice guy. And I enjoyed that. And
Martin, I was delighted to be able to introduce you to those two people. And of course, I've known Martin for a long time.
Yeah.
And Bob's wife was very, very ill at one point. She's doing very well now. But he and I used to talk on the phone, and we would pray about his wife. And Bob is just a peach of a guy. And I was happy to introduce you to them. But because of your notoriety in a positive way and the team's visibility, I also got to meet people that if I had gone as just Frank K4 FMH, they would have given me the time of day. I mean, they wouldn't have known me. So I also met people because of you guys.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I can't. I remember. I'm probably not talking out of turn now. Colin, you can tell the story about Frank had just finished an interview with Ray Novak on the ICOM stand, and we were introduced, and Mark Haynes just left Kenwood and happened to be a friend of Ray Novak, and we got to chat to him, didn't we? And Ray Novak was struggling to understand we didn't want sponsorship from him.
Yeah, you sound like you're setting me up to do a donation drive here. So here you go, guys. Here comes the donation drive. So the suggesting all is that Ray points up at the sign above the ICOM stand of all the shows and things he sponsors. And he sort of looks at us as if to say, well, okay, boys, what do you want? And we went, nothing. And he looks at us again, no, sort of, what do you want? No, nothing. And Mark Haynes, as Dad mentioned, who we'd known from the UK, who was helping out ICOM that weekend. And we said, hey, Mark, come over. Can you explain to Ray, how many times have we interviewed you in your previous role? And he says, 3-4 times. Okay, grand. And did we ask for anything? No. Did it cost you any money? No. And also, the penny dropped with Ray that we didn't want his money, we didn't want his hardware, we didn't want his kit, that we believe in the value for value model of being a listener-supported show and having our independence, etc. And the next words out of Ray's mouth were probably the most important ones in the world, and the reason why we take the model that we take, because he says to us, come here, I'll show you something, give you an exclusive. And that was the real drive, wasn't it? Of that opportunity that Ray basically turns and says, okay, if you don't want my money and I can't buy advertising and I don't want a freebie and you don't want a prize draw, whatever it be, okay, you're genuine, I'm going to give you some information.
That was good.
And that was a great example out there.
Okay.
Leading on to that one as well, this is the other part of, we mentioned about notoriety, we've spoken about notoriety and what the orange shirts do, etc. I think the whole thing about the listenership, the fact that people know who we are now and what we do, etc., has also opened up so many other doors to us, if you think about it. I mean, we are now, those are pretty much, most of us don't have any media training, but we're now known as journalists in the amateur radio field and get given scoops, exclusives, etc. from there. Chris mentioned the BBC that we went to. Now, I've got to think, Chris, when did we go there? Probably 7, maybe 8 years ago now, maybe it was. I can't remember exactly when, but around that maybe. And we interviewed various people as part of that. And the Laurie Margonis interview is a very interesting interview. And even my son used that for his history degree that he's currently doing at the moment, that interview, which is quite interesting. But we also got to interview the then BBC Director General, Lord Tony Hall. Now, not only is it the head man of the biggest probably media organisation in the UK, but the fact he's a lord of the realm, in essence, a high member of British society. And there we are with orange t-shirts and an orange microphone, with the great opportunity of interviewing him and bringing his words for our listeners and being able to talk to him about that. And that's really what this whole community and family has really opened up to us, is those great opportunities for us to talk to those people and bring your questions, because we try and think of the things you guys would ask as well, bring those questions to those people and get those answers for you.
Yeah, that was a good one. Listen, Dan's just joined us. Dan, KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
M1MRB, the KB6NU.
Hi, Dan. Well, on the call tonight, we've been nattering. You've got Chris, M0TCH, Bill, WC3B, Leslie, G0CIB, Frank, K4FMH, Colin, M6BOY, Edmund, M0MMG, myself, Martin M1MRB, and we have a special guest star. Say hello to Dan.
Good evening, Dan.
That's
Hi there.
I'm the boss.
Yeah.
She puts up with us.
Yeah, she's here, Dan. Dan, we've been talking about a few things, but mainly how we got involved with the podcast. And I seem to remember I put a request out trying to look for a lady to join us. And you wrote to me and said, if you don't get a lady that wants to join, I would like to join your podcast. Am I correct?
No, that was not the way it happened.
All right, I got it wrong. Sorry.
I can remember how it happened, but Dan can explain it better.
I was getting a bit worried you were calling Dan a lady there for a second. Thank God for stopping that story, Dan.
No, I was never called Dan a lady.
No. So I wrote it on the document, but I heard an episode where you talked about a one-day tech class, and you expressed some skepticism on that point. And I said, I'd been doing it for years by then, and I said, look, I've been doing this for years. I'll come and tell you how I do it. So you had me as the feature on episode 202. And then after that, I looked at some other episodes, and I didn't see any other Americans. And I said, hey, you should have, this should be an international thing. I said, you should have me as a presenter. And you accepted that proposal, and I first appeared as a presenter on episode 206.
So that was a nice and early one then. You must have beaten Frank. Hey, Frank, you've been knocked into fourth place now.
No, I recommended Dan to you, and then Dan was delighted that Dan joined a bit later. So was happy to have that happen.
Yeah, in fairness, I'm glad we're all on board and big fun. And yeah.
Martin, can I add one bit to what you said earlier, and what Colin said earlier about funds coming in? We don't rely on advertising at all. We rely on donations from the good people that are listening to this podcast, and they're always gratefully received. Thank you very much. And if they don't do that, we can't keep the show going. We don't get paid either. This is just fun, and that's why we do it. As
you mean you guys aren't getting paid?
No,
I'm just kidding.
Not a cent.
You get paid in abuse, Dan.
Well, I'll accept a few pints of Guinness. I don't mind, but no. And I'm sure that if we were getting paid and it was more of a commercial organisation, the whole ethos would be different, and it wouldn't be the fun what it is.
Yeah, guys. In fairness, if we took the advertiser's dollar and we thought about it very, very early on, but think about it. I've been criticised for not doing bad reviews, which is rubbish because we have done some bad reviews on product that was total rubbish. But the fact that our policy is that either we buy it ourselves, if it's stuff we review that we've bought ourselves, that's great because we can give it a fair review. If somebody wants us to review a product, and there have been people, they accept the situation of, if you send it to us, you send it at your cost. You have no right over telling us what we can and can't say. We will review it as it is. And if you want it back, you pay for it. because we don't make any money out of that. Now, in the nicest possible way, there's a book on my bookshelf above the desk here from a gentleman called Ron Bertrand, VK2DQ. And Ron wrote to us and he said, will you review my book? And we showed him our policy. And he wrote back and he said, yeah, I'd like you to review my book. I think it's a good book. And in fairness, I can't send it to you from Australia. It costs me far too much. So I'll send you the money, buy it in the UK, off Amazon or wherever it was, and review it. So we did. In fairness, it was a really, really good book. And at the end of it, he didn't want it back. And I thought Colin was probably the best recipient for it. So Colin's got the one that came over. But I thought it was such a good book, I actually went out and bought a copy. And lots of people come up to us and they go, you know, that either that book or that radio or whatever we review, they know that we're not being paid by the person to tell us it's good when it might be a heap of rubbish. And that is the thing. We have credibility in the podcast market. And I think that's one of our advantages. Probably I've gone off at long one, but yeah. You not agree, Colin?
No, I do. And I mean, again, it's even further than that. I mean, you know, when our presenters go to shows and etc., that's all paid for out of their own pocket as well. I mean, if you take my trip to Hamzilla a couple of weeks ago, if you factor in new hardware that was brought and flights and food and petrol and everything else, that probably cost me about €800 to go to that show. As an example, you know, Friedrichshafen will probably, you know, set me back multiple hundreds of euros. Going to Dayton, you know, is a good probably 1,500 to 2,000 euros to go to Dayton. So all that cost comes out of our pocket, and but at the same time, that's also why you probably see us having the fun that we have, because we do it as the way you guys would do it as well. We do it for fun, we do it for our own enjoyment, etc. as well, and then try and bring that flavour back to you. So as I say, and hence the reason why I say those donations are very, very important, because I say they do keep us on the air, etc., and allowing us to keep having the fun that we're having and go from there. But enough on that side of things, because I don't want to get bored if we tell us on that side of things. But I suppose the biggie, Dan, is we were talking about some of our highlights of being involved in the podcast, and would be really interested to know what your highlights have been over the years being involved with this motley crew.
Well, of course, the Dayton trip was fantastic. Just had a great time. But what I enjoy most is, you know, running into listeners either on the air or at ham radio events. I just had one a couple of weeks ago. I was at the Ham Sci workshop, and Ham Sci is the group that is doing actual scientific research using amateur radio. And they had set up a special event station there. And a fellow was, I visited the station one morning. A fellow was standing there all by himself. So I went up and introduced myself. And he says, KB6NU, he says, I know you. I listened to you on the ICQ podcast. I recognized your voice. And I thought that was incredible. We had a nice chat after that about the podcast and all kinds of other stuff. But that's what I enjoy the most, is actually meeting the listeners.
Yeah, I tell a story and apologize if I've told this one recently. I was doing a sales meeting in Dublin a few years ago, and I'm midway through the meeting, and the guy's looking at me a bit sort of, you know, weird, and sort of the expression of his face, so he's not really fully listening to the things I'm talking to him about. And he then says to me, I know your voice from somewhere. and Dublin's 2 hours north of me, you know. It's not, you know, it's a place I go to regularly, but I don't socialise up that wave a huge amount with it being. I'm trying to think, where do I know this guy from? And I'm racking my brains trying to think where I might have met him before, etc. And of course, what does he say? I listen to the ICQ podcast.
Huh.
And there I am in the middle of the work environment, if you're like, the IT industry, whatever it be. And the guy turns and says to me, I know you. I listen to your podcast. So, as I say, from the weirdest times, do you get recognized? Do you get that sort of recognition? So, and again, it's very warming that things you're involved in, the people recognize you for. I must admit, it is very, very warm, as you say, from there.
Yeah. When we went to the National Hamfest last year, I got your mum, you and I and Edmund. I think it was in the car, and we arrive at the front gate, the exhibitors gate, and I wind the window down, and I look at this guy and I say, "We got tickets." And he went, "It's okay, mine. I know who you are. In you go." I was like, "Whoa," So I recognise your voice, and it is strange. I find that very strange as well, Dan. But it's a nice feeling, and it's nice to talk to fellow amateurs. And I remember I think it was the first time I was in Friedrichshafen. We went for lunch, and we sat down at a table. I think 6 or 7 of us, and we sat down at a table having lunch. And this guy came across and he said, "Guys, would you mind if I sit with you?" "Of course you can." He said, "I'm a listener." And I went, "Yeah, fine, great. Come and join us," And he was over the moon that we'd spent time with him. And it's what we do. We're passionate about the hobby, and we just enjoy the company and what's thing. And we've just been fortunate enough that this vehicle's come along and kind of promoted us a little bit within the hobby, which is nice. And I know that you're a well-known author, Dan, and Karen's a well-known journalist. And as I say, Bill, I know he's damn good at IT. And Frank, you've been a professor and an editor. And then Leslie, you're board member at the RSGB.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's in the past.
I won't embarrass the rest of you, but I mean, I never went to university. I've probably got the worst education of all of you. And yet, we all get on. And I joke sometimes. I say, I never went to university, but my college professor rings me up occasionally. That's you, Frank. But we've been accused of being naughty toddlers, haven't we, Frank?
Yes, I believe we have. In fact, there's a Christmas card to that effect.
Yeah. I don't know whether to tell my story about the Fox affiliate lady or not on this podcast. But
please don't. I like my house standing where it does.
Mrs. B is shaking her head.
No, I'll tell you what, he's a real wind-up merchant.
Am I?
Yeah.
Mrs. B, is there any sort of stories you could tell?
Oh, now I'm in trouble. Thank you, Leslie.
Have I set you up there, Martin?
You have, yeah.
Just a little bit.
No, in fairness, you come to rallies with us and to help with the stands.
I do come to rallies with you, and I do talk to a lot of people as well, I have to say. And they're all very pleasant and nice people.
And you're with us this year out in Friedrichshafen, aren't you?
I am.
So, yeah, although Carol is not an amateur, has no interest in being one, she is supportive. And I believe that if Carol wanted to, she could pass an amateur radio exam. But she doesn't want to, and I'm never going to force her into doing it. It's her own choice. So, yeah.
Mrs. B, I'm going to ask a question. Does it come home from the radio club with stuff hidden in the boot that sort of it sort of wanted to find a home and crawled into the boot of his car? Do you find that occasionally?
No, because it's not his car, it's mine.
Leslie up here, I think.
Now, guys, this is the other thing. I'll tell you this. Years ago, I worked for Martin Lynch when he was over at Staines, and not before he went to Staines, when he was over at Chertsey. And I have seen people turn up and they say, right, Martin, I want to buy this brand new radio, but you've got a second-hand one on the shelf. So can you put my brand new radio in a second-hand box? And can you give me 2 receipts? One for the price I've told the wife I'm going to pay for it, and there's the rest of the money.
No.
Gospel. That is gospel. I've seen
That's
it done.
outrageous.
Yeah. And then they go out quite happy, and he'll do it for him, of course, because he's selling a brand new radio. Now, I have the opposite. I'll sit and look at something and I'll go, I really fancy that. I really want that. Should I or shouldn't I? And then Carol will say to me, oh, for God's sake, go and buy it.
I have to say, I do say that.
Yeah. So I have the opposite. The odd time you've caught Carol giving me a bit of grief at a rally, it's usually more in fun. I mean, I think I bought a little plastic box that cost about £2, and she said, well, how much you spent on that? What do you want that for? It was more of a giggle. When I come back with a radio that cost £90, she didn't say a word. So
is that how much he told you?
Definitely.
No, but then, in fairness, we've been married, 49 years, and this year, and we've had joint bank accounts, so Carol will see what's coming out of the bank anyway. So,
Mrs. B, I've got to say, under the Sale of Goods Act, it's far too late to return him now.
I know. Definitely far too late.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's... no, I don't. Carol and I don't have that problem. I have seen guys, and I talk to guys, and they're in Panicsville when they buy things that their wife's going to find out. And, you know, I don't think I can take more than that because I've got to hide it in my pocket when I go in the house or one thing. And I'm thinking, how can you live like that? But people do.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So,
you know, I get asked for a lot of advice about ham radio, and every once in a while, someone will say, "Oh yeah, but my wife doesn't want to see that antenna out in the yard." And I'll say, "Look, I can answer any question you want about ham radio, but marital relations is not my subject. So you got to ask somebody else about that."
The technical books are easy. That is like far too difficult.
Exactly.
I don't think anybody's written a book about that anyway.
What's that?
Well, there you go. Maybe that's my next book.
That's Dan's
How is that?
Martin, I'll really set you up on this one.
Maybe, Mum, you should give him the cover quote as well. You know, this book helps you survive in the amateur radio world with your relationship or something like that.
Exactly.
Many moons ago, because we don't have the car anymore, but we had a little Honda Jazz. It's a small car, Dan and Frank and Bill. And it was Carol's car, and she said to me, "You ain't putting an aerial on that." And I went, "No, all right." "And you ain't putting an aerial on that." "No, all right." So anyway, one Saturday when Carol was at work, I was picking her up. She used to work mornings at this place. And
I used to work all day on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, that particular day, he was only working a
I came home for lunch.
But anyway, there I was. I put an aerial on the back of this car, but I put a commercial one, so it was actually black and it wasn't particularly long, but it was a 270 on the tailgate, and I fitted it. And I picked Carol up from work, and she came out of work and she walked by this aerial, got in the car. I drove home. She got out. She walked round the back of the car, back past the aerial, indoors, and I said, "So the aerial's all right then?" And she said, "What aerial?" I'll go and have a look.
Martin, you're very lucky. Mr. Rothwell and I were seriously considering drilling a hole in the roof of that car because we'd got told on the course that's the best way to get the best possible match, best possible reception on your aerial.
You almost got me into a lot of trouble over that. And then what did you do? You bought a car with a glass roof.
Absolutely.
Oh, dear. Yeah. And then when I was going to do it, when I had a real old car that it didn't really matter that much, you and Martin wouldn't let me drill a hole in the roof. You suggested it wasn't a good idea.
Nah, it wouldn't have been a good idea at all, Martin. No.
But in fairness, you were right thinking about it because this car, although it had air conditioning, it had a sunroof or a roof that opened. and the glass would have come back about where I'd need to put the aerial anyway. So all in all, I think it was a good move. I didn't put one on, but hey, I haven't drilled a hole in Mrs. B's car
No,
yet.
you better not do either. Because you will not get away with that one.
There you go.
I do recall Colin coming over once. Was it a Renault or Citroen or something that had plastic panels? And even the Magmat wouldn't work.
Oh, it was horrible. Yeah, that Renault you had, Colin. I had to put the mag mount on the bonnet, I think, or the hood.
Yeah, it was when it slid off. When it slid off as we went down the road and clattered, I think, to about 2 panels and hit the road. I don't think you were too impressed with that car at all, was you?
No, it wasn't all about that one. But
no.
I remember fitting an area. Well, the tailgate mount is still on the back of Edmund's car, but you don't operate mobile, do you, Edmund?
Not very often. I do occasionally, mainly at VHF and UHF. And on that note, coming up on the final Saturday of the month, the 29th, I think it is, 29th of April, is another edition of the 145 Alive event promoting activity on FM. And there is a Facebook group if you're interested in finding out more about it. It's happening between 1 o'clock in the afternoon and 4 o'clock from memory. Just thought I'd get that plug in. Tim Golf 5 Tango Mike is the brains behind that one, and like I say, there is now a dedicated Facebook group if you fancy a bit of fun on 2 meters FM.
Yeah. Bill, you've been very quiet as well.
I've been enjoying listening here.
He's having a drink.
Yeah. I mean, you must have enjoyed us the time at Dayton when we were there, and I thought it was great. I won't tell the story of you embarrassing Frank, but
go ahead. You certainly have my blessing.
No. No, we need to skip that one. But
no, he signed the Official Secrets Act. He can't do that.
Yeah, as we say in the States, Vegas rules on that one. But I know everyone's going to talk about Dayton, and yes, how great that that experience was. I mean, even at one point we were sitting on the porch having a frosty cold beverage while you were calling CQ on 40 meters with your American call sign. It's like, even that was neat.
Yeah. They actually got on HF. Never came back to me, but I actually called CQ.
And the other thing that I always thought about that I really enjoyed, aside from Dayton, because I know everyone's going to say that was we did a trivia day with the Ham Radio Workbench crew. I really had a kick out of that. That was a good time.
Yeah.
Well, you were the star. You were the star on our team.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. A couple months ago, I can't remember when it was. It was some Friday night. I actually didn't have anything going on with the kids, and I jumped on that YouTube channel. I can't remember the gentleman's call sign, and he had trivia night, and I blew through that night too. I was like, oh, okay. I'm full of useless ham radio trivia.
Yeah, but the night we went out with Amateur Radio Newsline was fun, and I did enjoy going to the transmitter site, and that was a phenomenal transmitter to have a look around.
Martin, that was you're spot on. And see, I have a QSL card from when I was a child. I guess I don't know if I was a teenager, but somewhere right in that area of when I listened to them and sent them a reception report from Middle Georgia. And so that to me was a very treasured event to actually go back and see WLW. And that was a real highlight.
Yeah. And Karen was speaking to me. I've got some audio from Karen to add as well, but she was saying how she wished that she'd have made that trip. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it that year. But I say it was good fun. And I remember also at one point in time, there were more ICQ people on the Amateur Radio Workbench stand than there were Amateur Radio Workbench people. I think we We bombed them, didn't we, at one point in time?
Yeah, we have photos of that floating around somewhere.
Yeah, but it was good fun, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed going around the flea market with Dan. I managed to get a quick round the flea market with Dan. The only thing for me is that in reality, I couldn't bring anything back because we were travelling very light. I managed a 10-day trip with Colin and Edmund by just taking a rucksack, and we stayed in Airbnbs, and we ended up going to Airbnbs that had obviously got washing machines, so they just washed their clothes and carried on. But we did travel rather light that time. But the other interesting one, I'm going to hopefully one of the other, either Edmund or Colin will pick this up. But the other interesting one was when we went to a motel on the way back up to Chicago, and stayed overnight, and we went to Neil Armstrong's museum in the morning. But the night before, we did the stupid Brits abroad thing. Let's go out for a coffee. We'll just walk down the road for a coffee. And we walked outside this motel, and there was a McDonald's about 3/4 of a mile, if not a bit further away. You just about see the Big M. And we thought, well, it's not the best coffee in the world, but it'll do for a socialise. And we started walking, and then we spotted the Waffle House, didn't we, Colin? Oh, he's gone quiet.
We did. But in fairness, yeah, I mean, look, we spotted this Waffle House, and we go in, and we get a real flavour of, I suppose what would then have been rural America for us in some respects, and a lovely chat with a lady, and then Edmund, you became the star of the show.
Edmund was the star.
Yeah.
Edmund, explain about the you managing to get an actual employee's hat rather than the paper hats that we were given.
Well, because I've got a very big head, I managed to rip the paper hat, and one of the ladies working in there, I think, took pity on me and gave me one of these, what's the proper name for it? Thing that went round my head instead with WH.
It's like a sun visor, yeah.
It's like a sun visor thing with WH written on the front of it, and I've still got it to this day. And I do wear it sometimes, and I wore it to the National Hamfest in Newark the next time we went there afterwards, because there is a repeater in Swindon on 2 meters, GB3WH, and I thought, if I wear this thing long enough, is somebody going to come up to me and say, "Are you the repeater keeper for WH?" But it never happened, to my great disappointment.
I think you are downplaying it a little bit. I mean, that lady that night nearly became our first ICQ groupie for you that night, in fairness. I mean, she did take a particular shine to your way, and I think you, as we would say in London, you pretty much nearly pulled that night.
I think it's Edmund's disarming, approach to life, isn't it? I think I think the ladies just like attracted me, isn't it, Edmund? Sometimes with you.
Do you know, I wish I'd known that I had this magical power when I was in my teens and 20s. Life would have been so different.
Well, you know what it is that Americans go gaga over British accents.
I think that might
now
be
you
true
tell me.
Because I think that might be true, because we stopped off to get a coffee somewhere, didn't we, when we were en route back from Dayton to Chicago, I think.
Yeah.
And I bought a coffee in there, and I wasn't sure if I needed to pay any extra for, well, in this country we would call it VAT, wouldn't we? Value added tax.
Yeah.
Whereas in the States you don't.
Sales tax.
You pay sales tax. You pay sort of separately on top afterwards, don't you? So I wasn't sure if I needed to give them any more money for the coffee that I just bought, and they told me that I didn't, but they seemed to like the fact that I'd asked.
I tell you now, Edmund, and I'm sure I've told you before, you bought that coffee or whatever you were getting, and then you went off wandering around, do something else, and the lady came across to me and she said, "Your colleague?" And I went, "Yeah." She said, "Is he married? And if not, can I take him home with me?" That's serious, Edmund.
So there's your ICQ tip. If you're at a Hamfest and you want to get some action with the ladies, hang around Edmund. There's your tip for you for this show.
As for Dan's comments about the accent, the problem I have is whenever I go to America, people think I'm Australian. So
no, you're not.
Yeah.
One of the things Edmund did during that visit, if Step IR ever wants to make an antenna for an HT, Edmund has to be the role model for it. He had an HT out in the rain, calling ICQ, with a whip on the top of that HT that's got to be the longest whip on an HT I have ever seen. Edmund, you have to regale us with that.
7/8 wavelength base loaded.
Yeah.
It's telescopic, but it is quite long. And yes, my one and only SOTA summit to date, Campbell Hill in Ohio, I managed to get the 4 stations on 146.52, which is to the USA what 145.500 is to the UK and Europe. So if anybody tells you that there isn't life on 2 meters, whichever country you're in, it's not true. There is.
Yeah, you went with Ed Durant on that, and wasn't he trying to do HF and he just got wet and no contacts, and you did the 4 with your handy talkie?
Much to his annoyance, yes. Sorry about that, Ed.
So, yeah, I think Colin and I decided that, you drove him, Chris, didn't you? And Colin and I decided we'd stay in the restaurant until he came back.
Oh, we were working hard on producing the next episode, if I remember rightly.
Oh yeah,
which
actually
proves the point.
one.
We don't take time off for holidays or anything like that. We were, producing the next episode or starting to build out the next episode, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, if I remember right, we recorded an episode in Chicago.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So and we recorded them in Cyprus as well. So we occasionally we record them wherever we are. But
True. We're thinking about that. I must find out if Friedrich Sharpen's a record weekend or not. Actually, I haven't checked that yet.
No, neither have I, but you can guarantee it will be.
Am I right in saying that we've not missed an episode in nearly 15 years?
Correct. We've never missed a fortnightly release schedule in nearly 15 years.
And of the 400 episodes, how many is Mr. Butler, Martin Butler Sr., been involved with?
I've recorded 399. I've been on record 399. There was one where I was in Cyprus and we wasn't sure very early on whether I would get an internet connection back. It was quite early in the 2000s, and I did a lot of the background work. I sorted out news stories and I did lots of other bits and pieces. So I was involved with it, but there was just one I didn't actually present.
Okay, another question. How many features, Martin, have you done personally yourself? Have you counted them?
Oh, God knows. I don't keep a track of them. Then this is probably giving away a big secret, but I don't mind. Often on the Monday, we record every fortnight. On the Monday of the week we're going to do the recording, Chris will often say to me when we go to the radio club, "Martin, what's the feature this week?" And I'll go, "I ain't got a clue, Chris. No idea." There have been times when I've gone to bed on a Friday night not having a clue what the feature is going to be, just there has to be one by 10 o'clock Saturday. And so I go to bed and I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with an idea. And that then becomes the feature. And I don't know how I do it. I don't know how. And some of you can call me out for some of it being a bit basic at times. But quite honestly, when I've got to pull a feature every episode, Sometimes I'm lucky because other people do them for me. Sometimes I'm lucky because I can get an interview with somebody. But other times I sit there and I rack my brains and think, what am I going to do?
Martin, I have gotten very, very positive feedback on almost all of those basic features that you're mentioning, because we have that in our audience, people who need and want basic stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When I used to write for the magazine, we used to say, when we weren't coming up with any ideas, we always used to say, like, what kind of basic thing can we cover? And, even, like I used to work for a magazine called Test and Measurement World, even as something as silly as, where to put the test leads to make voltage measurements. I mean, people need that. There's always new readers that need that information, just like there's always new listeners that need basic ham radio information.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to, as I often do, Phil down in Australia, VK6ADF, and he was saying to me, well, you could rerun some of your other features. He said, or just rehash them, go back and have a look, and there's new things you can add to them. And I think I did a few episodes back. It was about getting extra membership and growing your club. And because I got asked why hadn't we done it, and when I looked, I'd done it something like 13 years previous. And when I went back and listened to the feature was, I couldn't better the feature itself. I could only add to it. There was some extra ideas. So, yeah, you're right. Some of the stuff maybe we need to reinvestigate because, a lot's changed in the hobby in the last 20 odd years. So maybe we ought to relook at some of the things. But there you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I think the other thing is we all have quite a different interest of doing things in the hobby, which is good. So we all, we got those of you who are Morse code operators, those of you big operators, those of you who want to fiddle with the components, that across the board. So it is good, I would suggest. But so I'm going to round it up shortly. But anything else anybody thinks you want to raise as something that you particularly liked?
Well, I'm going to say, Martin, that it's an achievement to get to 400. I really do. And long may this continue. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, because I'm changing employment at some point and things will change. But I just hope it continues. I really do.
Yeah, well, we'll continue as long as we can. And the thing is that the podcast should continue as long as we can because it shouldn't be reliable on one person. And so
absolutely,
because we've got a team of people doing it, as some of our presenters have had to take time out, we carry on. So we should be able to.
Can I name? I was going to say, can I name and shame some people?
What, me?
No, me.
I just want to say, I've learned something from everybody I've interacted with, but I especially want to name and shame Matt Nasser, M0NJX, who used to be on the round table with me. The dude is smart, legitimately smart, and I always learn something new. Likewise, I always love talking with Ed Durant, DD5LP. Not only do we have huge conversations at Dayton about IT stuff that we both had to deal with over the years. His career is like 15 years ahead of mine. so there's a lot of overlap there, but he's another one. Every time I talk to him, I learn something new. And I'm going to embarrass Dan KB6NU here. I've read your blog for feels like over a decade now. And dude, you can write. What a gift.
Thank you.
Holy crow. And, I also say this too, because I know that you do the training manuals, and I don't know how many thousands of hams you've helped get their license, but I can tell you, I've personally steered 5 towards your books, and 3 got their techs, and 2 are generals right now.
That's wonderful.
They read your books. They listen to me. Because a lot of times, I know everybody runs in this. Folks will ask you, hey, what's your opinion on this? Or do you have advice on that? And then they go do something different. But that's one that always seemed to work out was, send them towards Dan's books if they're having struggle in learning the material.
Yeah,
that's
thanks
my
a lot.
name and shame segment.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, and what you've practically hit on, is the more you know, the more you realize just how little you really do know. And secondly, I got taught this when I was a IT techie working with a very senior salesman. And he said to me, and it's not just me, but he said, Martin, when you go and see somebody, listen, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you talk. Understand what's going on. And usually, we've got a good bunch of people here, and we all learn from each other. You're dead right. So, but I do think we learn. The more you know, the more you realise just how little you do know.
The listening and then speaking thing, I want to name and shame Edmund on that, because there was multiple times at Dayton that we'd be interacting with somebody and he would be staying there very, very quiet and he would listen. But then, man, the one question he asked was just perfect. It's like, wow, you definitely heard everything this person said and synthesized, the only question that, makes sense.
Yeah. And as per Matt, in the nicest possible way, Matt still has the opportunity to come back whenever he's available. And I'm hoping that he does come back in the next year. I know he's moved countries a few times, but
I was going to say, he dropped me a note and email. It probably was 6 or 8 months ago now.
Yeah.
But he makes my level of busy look idle. He is genuinely a very busy person between the kids and work. It's just, it's wow.
Yeah. But as I say, he has the invite to come back whenever he feels he's able to. He didn't leave under a cloud, and I'd have him back tomorrow, so it's not a problem. So on that one, anything else anybody wants to?
Just done a quick calculation. So 7th of February 2027 will be episode 500. So just under 4 years away. We'll be back here again together and celebrating another 100 episodes.
Yeah, that'd be good. Let's aim for 500. And then we'll
absolutely.
Is that okay with Colin?
But in fairness, that won't happen probably without the most important thing, and that's everybody that downloads, listens, and tells people about the show and what we're doing, and do you know what I mean? Lets people at their club know about what they've listened to, etc. So, I mean, again, a big thank you to everybody that continues to download, that stayed with us in the early days when it was atrocious, that listens to us. We're on and, comes up to us at shows and, shakes a hand and tells us how much they enjoy what we're doing. I mean, seriously, without all that, it'll be very easy for us just to think, oh, well, no one's listened to us and walk away and go do something else. But it's that commitment and that friendship that you guys have all given us that gives this wonderful platform for us to, have this fun that we have and I suppose extend this club hub feel out to everybody else. So thank everybody for all your downloads over what is now approaching 15 years and 400 episodes. As I say, without those downloads, we really wouldn't have achieved anything that we've achieved.
Yeah.
Colin, with that said, I think it's time to get Mrs. B a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit.
I think we should do that, don't you, Mrs.
And dunk
B?
it.
No, I don't dunk it. It's messy.
Leslie's the dunker. Yeah. Okay,
There you
guys.
go.
I'm gonna stop the record here because otherwise, I think we've already got a 3-hour podcast about to go out. But thanks for your time, and
Good. I need the drop.
I'll say 73s to you all.
7-3.
Yeah.
73 all, and
73,
here's to the next milestone.
Yeah.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, I hope you really enjoyed our reflections and thoughts over the last 400 episodes, some of our joys and experiences, and more importantly, how people got involved in the show and what they get from the show. I hope you also got, as I say, the tone as well, that without you, without your downloads, without your support, without your comments, handshakes, etc., I say all this would be completely worthless. So again, a tip of the hat to you all as well, and a celebratory glass, please. I say as we all celebrate episode 400 of your ICQ Amateur Ham Radio podcast. And now, as I say, there are some very special donors we need to thank this episode. The 400 Club members, who are forever known as the guys who supported this special occasion: Winston Lawrence, KD2, Whiskey Lima Lima, Neil Connor, Mike 6, Charlie Uniform Echo, and Malcolm Heath, Kilo Sierra Zero Tango. I say many thanks for your very kind support, as I say, for the ICQ Podcast 400 Club. We also have one-off donors to thank this episode: Koos van der Hoot, Papa Echo 4, Kilo Hotel, and Dale McCaffrey, VK6 Delta Mike Charlie, for their one-off donations as well. And of course, their donations, along with the monthly subscription donors, not only provided this episode to be advert-free and helping us pay our way, but also all the episodes, obviously, in the future. And we can't thank all donors over the last 400 episodes, as I say, for their kind support and allowing us to take this path, as I say, to produce your amateur ham radio show for you. So that I think a big congratulations, and a tip to all those listeners, donors, commenters, etc. that we've had over the last 15 years. You'd certainly echo those thoughts.
Yeah, I certainly echo those thoughts, and it's great to meet up with some of the listeners at shows. It's also great to meet up with some of the other presenters of shows. We are great. It's always great fun, but most especially, it's great for the listeners to keep downloading, because without you doing that, we wouldn't have a podcast and it wouldn't be worth us doing it. But we do have fun, and we thank you for downloading.
Yeah, I think we alluded to this. This is our longest job that either of us have had, if you think of it as a job. And certainly to produce 400 of anything, I think is certainly an achievement. And I say, without your support, guys, we certainly couldn't have done it. There's also, of course, some other people we'd like to thank as part of that group. So all our friends and colleagues that joined us on today's episode and in previous episodes as well. As I say, so many to mention, but we couldn't have done it without you, and we really do appreciate that support, camaraderie, that creation of that hub, club, family, etc. that everyone so enjoys. So thank you, everybody, for taking your time and helping us out along the way as we go from there. Right, well, I think that just about sums up our 400th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. As I say, we're not going to guarantee we're going to do another 400 episodes, but I can certainly tell you the fact that we're already working on episode 401 for you. We'll, of course, be released in a fortnight's time. So, as I say, the cycle never stops, as they say. But most important thing for me to do now is to suggest that you make Mrs. B another celebratory drink, like we did on the 400 record, and look after her with that beverage, and maybe a something treat as well, because she's obviously a vital part of the cog of the team that helps out with everything we do there.
Yes, certainly will do, Colin. I'm going to make your mum a nice cup of tea, find a chocolate biscuit, and then spend a bit of time with your mum. So, all great. And here's to episode 401, 73.
Yeah, 73. So catch you in a fortnight's time.